Thank you, Nick. Can I get a roll call vote while you're at it? Now the meeting is called to order. Welcome, everybody.
Sure can. Have the time marked down as 5:31. Director Engfer.
Here.
Director Koenig. Director McPherson. Director Cassidy.
Here.
Director Pollock.
Here.
Director Dillis. Director Mayhood. I saw her hop out there. Oh, I think I see you there, Gail.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm
You're here. Gotcha. Director Smoley. And I believe I saw you as well, Mr. Smoley. If you could kindly identify yourself.
Here.
Gotcha. Director Stiles.
I'm here.
Director Perry.
I'm here.
All right, for alternates, Director Baskin.
Nick, may I suggest, I have seen several of the voting members just coming in. So before you count the alternates, maybe you want to go and do another round of voting members.
Yep.
Thank you.
For voting members, Director Koenig.
Here.
We got you down, sir. Director McPherson.
Here.
You as well, sir. Director Dillis.
Here.
All righty. All right, back over to alternates then. Director Baskin. Director Brown. Director Koopman.
Here.
And I understand, sir, that you are functioning as a primary tonight.
Yes.
Awesome. Director Hayes. Director Lind. Director Henry. I thought I saw you there, Lois. Might be muted. See that Director Henry is here for the record. Director Eckwall. All right, I see that we do have a couple of unidentified callers calling in. If you are on the board of directors or you are an alternate on the board of directors for this agency, if you could kindly identify yourself if you are calling via phone. Hearing none and seeing none from the phones. All right, we have 11 out of 11. Director Perry, we have quorum.
Yes,
And
we do.
And I think Donna Lynn just joined us too, for your record.
Noted. Thank
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, great. 1.3, oral communications on matters not on the agenda. Does anybody from the public, or I guess even the board, since you're members of the public also, have a oral communication on a matter that is not on the agenda? Nick, do you want to open up the phones just in case someone's bursting with a question?
yeah,
I see
Mr.
someone.
does have a comment he wishes to put forth. Let's get him and then we can go to the phones and see if anybody else.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can.
My name is Jim Mosier. I'm a resident of Felton and a member of the Friends of the San Lorenzo Valley Watershed. I am thankful to Rosemary Menard for writing her guest commentary in the Sentinel this morning, because otherwise I would not have been aware that the city of Santa Cruz is in the process of, as she put it, revising the city's century-old water rights so that we have more flexibility in how we use and store water. As a resident of the San Lorenzo Valley, I'm familiar with the city's water rights, that they involve drawing from the San Lorenzo River and storing it in Loch Lomond Reservoir. So any revision must necessarily have to do with the river and in turn potential impacts on the SLV watershed, which I am very concerned about. After some investigation, I was able to find the petition the city has submitted to the State Water Resources Control Board, and in short, the petition proposes that the city divert water not just to Loch Lomond, but to various underground wells and other underground storage areas for use in areas outside the Santa Margarita Aquifer and San Lorenzo Valley watershed, including, for example, the Soquel Creek Water District. Now, I have more questions and opinions about the petition at this point. First of all, shouldn't this be proposal? Shouldn't it be part of the deliberations here and part of the negotiations regarding how to protect the Santa Margarita and associated aquifers? Maybe I have missed it, but has the city brought this to the attention of this board and provided an explanation of its purpose and potential impacts on the plans being made here to protect the aquifers? And why is this happening unilaterally? Is the city intent to draw more water than it's currently drawing or not? It's unclear from the petition, and if so, how much? Shouldn't any underground any underground storage of SLV water be used to recharge the aquifers, not diverted to other water districts not in the area? What impact will the proposed diversion have on SLV watershed and aquifers? What impact is specifically, this is as a Felton resident, will it have on the ability of San Lorenzo Valley Water District to draw surface water from Fall Creek, the primary source of water for Felton? I note that the date for filing protests is March 12th, which makes it a very short timeline. And to my knowledge, no residents of SLV have been notified about this proposal. I hope the city will withdraw the proposal and allow this board, the SLVW board, WD board, the Scotts Valley Water Board, as well as SLV residents to review it and assess its potential impacts on our watershed and associated aquifers. Otherwise, I urge this board and other boards potentially affected by the proposed diversion to submit protests so that all parties have a chance to weigh in on the proposal and understand its impacts. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Very well done. Good use of your time. Excellent. Anyone else? Okay, hearing none.
If I could just check the phones real quick.
Yes, please. Sorry.
Yep, no worries. So if you are a member of the public and you wish to make a oral communication on a matter not on the agenda, you have been unmuted. This is your opportunity to speak for item 1.3, oral communications, members from the public. This includes those calling in via telephone. Just got one more here. Caller who just joined the call. We are currently on oral communications matters not on the agenda, item 1.3 of tonight's agenda. If you wish to make an oral communication, this is your opportunity to do.
Okay, I did blow past 1.2, which is additions or deletions to the regular agenda. Do we have any?
There is none from staff.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's dive right into the work ahead of us. I'm going to turn this over to Dave Sepos, our facilitator, and to Georgina King and group, and let's go. Dave, okay, well, then I'll give it to Georgina, or who wants to run through the GSP roadmap? Anyone want to take that for, or?
Okay, I'm here. I'm Chris.
Okay, sounds like in seventh circle of hell, computer-wise. That's okay.
Nick, I need you to unmute my phone.
We'll get through this part. Georgina, do you want to?
Okay. Are there many of me shouting
You're
back
good.
at you?
You're there. No, you're fine.
Just one of me?
Okay, guys,
Okay.
can you hear me?
Gotcha, Dave.
All right. Sorry, I'm having internet difficulties in Davis today, and so I have to participate vocally by phone, and Nick had me muted. Okay. So, can you guys hear me okay now?
We can.
All right. Very good. So I'm going to hand it over here to Georgina in a minute to, as the screen shows, to just go over the roadmap. Then we're going to have a series of presentations, starting first with Cameron from Montgomery, followed by Georgina doing follow-up, and then lastly we have a presentation that's been worked on by one of your fellow board members, Jeff Koopman. I want to very quickly draw attention to the email that was sent out yesterday, and just to reiterate that beginning tonight, I will be employing for these sections, basically section 2 that I facilitate, a more prescriptive and directive facilitation process. Very quickly reiterate, after the completion of a presentation, I will pose questions to the board. Any opportunities for the board to speak first. After the board has weighed in, which can include commentary and discussion with the person who was the presenter, I will then open up the floor for any feedback to be provided by members of staff. To reiterate for my email, any member of the board is certainly welcome to and certainly can pose any questions to any staff members or consultants at any time. But absent that, I will bracket and ask that staff hold off on any of their comments so we are no longer having an interspersing between board member comments and staff member comments that might be confusing to general members of the public to understand exactly who is speaking and when. After staff have had an opportunity to speak, should they choose to, I will open up the floor for public comment, and Nick will assist me with opening the phones. Thereafter, I will come back to the board. If there is a piece of guidance that the speaker or the presenter needs, we will then go through that process to get that guidance, going one by one to every board member. Otherwise, we will then move on. So that is going to be the structured facilitated process we'll be using tonight and from this point on for this agenda item that I support as your neutral facilitator. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Georgina to now go into the content portion of tonight's section.
Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you in your little rectangles up there. I'm going to start off here like I usually do with the roadmap, where we are in the process of developing the GSP. Next slide there, please. Oh, wait, sorry, let me go over this. So we're in the middle of, you see the red box that on the bottom row there of dots. We're between developing the sustainability management criteria, SMCs, and then also projects and management actions. And these are fairly interrelated, as you'll hear further later on tonight. So that's where we are in the overall scheme of things. We still have to, once we decide on projects and management actions, and they're not specific projects, it's more general, what we're going to do in the basin to increase groundwater levels, then we can write up the GSP implementation plan. And those 5 sections comprise the GSP. And that needs to be done. It will be before your board, hopefully, the end of July. July's meeting, the draft GSP will be presented, and hopefully you will approve that for public comment. And then it will go out for about two months, 60 days, I think. Yeah. So next slide there, Nick, please. So we had a setback with having to have another round of modeling that we didn't expect because of the very dry climate projection that we used initially. So I've had to shuffle things around, and the March and April meetings are going to be quite busy because, like you just heard, we don't have, after this meeting, we only have really 3 more meetings to decide on the rest of the sustainable management criteria and the projects. Hopefully we'll make some headway on the projects today. So today, like you heard, we're going to be talking mostly about the model results using a new climate, and I'm also going to go over the problem statement document that is now got a different name. But next month, what we're going to be looking at is if there are any other runs that we're going to do on the model, we are going to review those. We're also hoping to present to you cost-benefit analysis of the different types of different projects and management actions that you've seen in that big table before. And we're also hopefully going to get to proposing some measurable objectives and undesirable results for depletion of interconnected surface water and chronic lowering of groundwater levels. So a lot is going to happen in March. And then in April, we're going to hopefully finalize those SMCs and also look at the last sustainability indicator, which is the reduction of groundwater and storage indicator, those minimum thresholds and measurable objectives. We're also going to be getting the monitoring network section of the report out, and I'll be presenting that to you along with the water budget. So these are all different parts of the GSP that we're starting to move very quickly on in the next coming months. And that's all I have on that. Dave, you're muted still.
No, I was waiting for you to complete.
Okay,
So
I am complete.
Okay, so at this point, I believe that we are prepared to pull up the presentation that Cameron is going to give on the development of a new climate scenario. So Cameron, are you here with us?
I'm going to start, and I'm going to bring it up and be running it.
All right, very good.
So let me see. Do you see Cameron anywhere there? Actually, no, first I'm talking about the problem statement, Dave. We're not going to get into Cameron just yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. My apologies. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Right. Okay, so this is a continuation of the problem statement item that we had last meeting. Now you see the title of the slide is now focus areas for addressing groundwater sustainability. And really what's happened is that the problem statement has evolved into a document that hopefully is more descriptive of what we're going to be using it for. And these changes that have happened to the document have been driven by the comments and suggestions that you provided at January's meeting. And if you remember, the purpose of the original December workshop that we had was that we wanted to identify groundwater problem conditions in the basin. And then based off that, staff and our modeling team would evaluate ways to improve those conditions using the groundwater model, because we don't really have another tool to do that. And we wanted to see what those improvements could be with different types of projects and management actions, mostly projects in this case. So that's why it's changed its name. And how it's being used, you asked this question directly to me last month. And really why it is being used already, and to focus the solutions to problems on the problem conditions that you identified, and that these need to be addressed in the GSP, and the way you'd address them is with projects and management actions, and that these are things that we can model with the model that's been developed for this purpose. And how we're going to use it is to, well, that's how we're going to use it, but what do we do with this document? It is going to be included as an appendix to that section 4 that describes all the projects and management actions, and that's to provide a record of the process that you've taken to identify the groundwater conditions that are being addressed by projects and management actions. So this hopefully is a little bit clearer than what the answer I gave last month. So now the content is fairly similar. The things that have changed is I've reorganized this document. The only thing that's kind of new is this background and purpose, where I talk about pretty much the items that I've just mentioned in the previous slides. And then there's a section of why we started with this problem statement and how it's evolved to what it is now. The desired conditions are exactly the same as what they were previously last month. And then there's two other sections. One is the groundwater sustainability focus, and this is where we are talking about the lowered groundwater levels in specific parts of the basin that you're identified, and we describe the current groundwater conditions, the consequences of those lowered groundwater levels, and potential solutions to address those lowered levels. Now, as the name suggests, and the heading of this section, this is a basin problem that is a focus of the groundwater sustainability plan. It is something that is going to be addressed by projects and management actions. There's also a basin condition that's not a direct result of unsustainable groundwater use. The nitrate and contaminants of emerging concern in basin groundwater that does impact surface water beneficial users. And there we describe the condition and the consequences. And the solution is not anything that we can model. And there is a solution, there is a way forward that we need to work together with the agencies that regulate this groundwater condition, namely the county. And there's various initiatives that they have undertaken to improve nitrate. The reason why it's not left out completely, there was some suggestion that or recommendations that it be left out, but it is a problem that this basin is facing. Yes, it's not something that's being addressed by projects and management actions. It is already described in the GSP in the basin settings section, and so it is something that needs to be recognized. So that is why it's in there, and hopefully I can hear back from you all how this sits with you. If you're okay with this, Dave might go around the room, so to speak, to see how you all feel about this. We're not going to be changing wordsmithing very much more. If there is, I think Perrette is going to take that on. I have to focus the next few months very heavily on developing the rest of the SMCs and getting the GSP written in the short time we have left. I have gotten out of this the direction that I needed to focus the modeling, and so that's great. That's the number one thing I wanted to get out of this. But this document is a record of what you have discussed in the meeting, and I do want to make sure that that is accurate. So with that, Dave, I hand it back to you.
Okay, thank you very much. So at this point in time, I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor. Like I say, I'm not going to go doing an around the horn kind of question. Best as I know, Georgina, this is not a particular direct guidance or direction that you are needing from the board, but rather an update on the use and a further clarification of why some of this information is important and how it will be found and used. That said, let's go ahead and open the floor using the methods we always do, which is folks using the chat method to identify they have a comment or a question. So the floor is open. Okay, I am not seeing any questions or comments. Nick, are you? Am I missing something? I'm not seeing any.
Not seeing any on this side, nope.
Okay, all right. Let me now go to staff. Do staff have any questions or comments that they would like to make? All right, hearing none and seeing none. Nick, let's go ahead and very quickly, ideally, check in with the public. And you can go ahead and open up the phones. Be sure that when you do that and then you mute back up, Nick, that you don't mute me. So at this point in time, are there any members of the public that would like to weigh in, either online or on the phone?
All right, hearing none online. Specifically, if you're a member of the public calling in via telephone and you wish to make a comment at this time, you have been unmuted. Hearing none,
Okay.
seeing.
Very good. All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Georgina. Next steps. Georgina?
Yeah. I'm sorry, I got to switch presentations here, so bear with me for a second.
All right.
I want to just make sure that we have Cameron here. Cameron, can you unmute yourself and say if you're here?
I'm not seeing him in the meeting roster. Oh, no, there he is.
Okay, very good, because he's up next, and I was hoping he would be here.
Cameron, you with us? There he is. Very good. Okay, Georgina's pulling up the presentation. There we go.
Okay, so I'm going to kick this off, and this is round 2 of the model results of potential projects. And it's, as Dave mentioned, Cameron's going to start off. And Cameron Tana is, he runs the Oakland office, and also he's the operations manager for our California offices of Montgomery and Associates. And in this project, he has talked to you before on groundwater modeling, because he's the groundwater model lead. There's a team of other hydrogeologists and modelers that work under him that have worked tirelessly, especially the last few months, to get all of this information ready for you. So Cameron is also going to become more involved as we go on, because he and I work together in Mid-County developing that GSP, and we were a pretty efficient team developing the technical parts of the GSP. And so Cameron is going to be presenting actually on the climate change, because that is an important part of groundwater modeling, as you heard last month. And he may also help out with some of the other slides as we go on, explaining the model results. So I'm going to just share with you the objectives generally of this session here. We're going to be looking at the new climate change projection used in the modeling. We're going to look again at the baseline scenario that represents a no project condition using this new climate projection. And then look at the 2 different model scenarios that we ran. What were the results? Similar to last month, where we look at groundwater levels, we look at the base flow changes, and the cumulative change in storage. We're going to compare those against each other. You'll get a good idea of the impacts of those projects, and then discuss what we should do next. And so let me see, I'll hand it over to Cameron, and Cameron, just let me know when you want me to advance the slides.
Thank you, Georgina, and thank you, everybody. It's good to be here. I look forward to continuing to contribute as we complete this GSP and help set how you'll manage this basin for the next 50 years, but with the opportunity to adapt that as you go along. As Georgina introduced, I will be describing a new climate projection, one different from what we presented last month. The model team did learn of the feedback that you provided last month, and we are moving forward with this alternative projection based of that feedback. I think primarily what we presented last month appeared to be too extremely dry over time, and so we're trying to address that and the other issues that came up last month, while being consistent with what we have presented about climate science so far, and those were presentations by Sean Chartrand of Balance. So we want to continue to be consistent with that, and also use what is available to easily implement in the short time frame we have to model projected conditions into the future, the potential project and management actions to achieve sustainability, and complete this GSP in the time that we have remaining. So that's what we were trying to do here. hopefully we met the mark, but we will present that now. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So that's to try to summarize basically what Sean has presented to you in the past about climate science. And I think the takeaways from his presentations previously was the projections are pretty consistent in a couple respects. And one of them is that it's going to get warmer and temperatures are going to rise. But the other main part is that the expectation is that there will be more variability in climate, especially with respect to precipitation. And this infographic that is copied from researchers at UCLA described that. Sean has presented this before, where we expect more extreme dry years, more extreme wet years, where we show examples of recent years that exhibit these characteristics as climate change is already starting to occur. And then also this idea of dry to wet or wet to dry whiplash. Well, you got a very dry year followed by a very wet year. And we said 2017 to 2018. And I think we're potentially seeing it last in this year as well. And then also kind of more severe storm sequences where storms will come in shorter time periods. So this is the basic guiding idea we want to represent in the scenario that we simulate for planning for your basin. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So Sean at Balance had developed a process to represent these ideas previously. And the idea is that there is no one right climate change model. And so let's take the information from multiple models and use that, given what we really expect with warmer temperatures and greater precipitation variability. And so this graphic, I will not get into the details now, especially without Sean here today, but the idea is basically take multiple models, and for the ensemble we're using, we're taking the 4 that are rectangle or boxed, and taking information from that and doing a statistical representation of the multiple models. But also having that statistical representation create the variability that we expect with precipitation and with temperature. So for precipitation, the dry years use a 10th percentile from the multiple models, and that means the dry years are pretty dry. And similarly for wet years, it's 75th percentile. The wet years are fairly wet. And then similar to temperature, but except in this case, we really wanted to make sure that it is a warmer scenario because that is what we expect going forward. So even the cooler years were in the middle of the multiple models, and the warmer years are almost the warmest years. So really trying to make sure we still have variability, but that the hotter temperatures are represented. So we're trying to take more information in than we have in the past, where it was one specific model, and we're not just relying on that one model, and representing the climate science that Sean has presented previously. I think a previous question came up in respect to what emission scenario is being used. We are using the emission scenario known as RCP 8.5, RCP standing for Representative Concentration Pathway. And they're just assumptions about what we expect greenhouse gases to be in the atmosphere based off of assumptions of how much emissions going forward. 8.5 is one of the most, expects the most emissions going forward with those assumptions. And that is what we are using in this scenario. Next slide, please. And so do want to basically represent the output from this, what we're calling the 4 model ensemble 5099. And it's an ensemble of 4 different global climate models, so that's why we're doing it that way. There have been previous ensembles that take different assumptions, so we identify it with this temperature being a little warmer, the 50th percentile than the 99th percentile. So that's just the identifier for us. And I know you've seen these plots before, but there are differences in that this 4-model ensemble is what we're moving forward with, shown here. It's different from what Sean has presented before. But also, just to remind you and go over a little bit about what we're looking at here. And these actually represent departures on a monthly basis from historical averages. And so on the x-axis on the bottom here, it's precipitation. So if it's less than 1, it's drier, lower rainfall than historically. And if it's greater than 1, it's wetter than historical. Temperature is on the y-axis, so 1 is about, on a monthly basis, is what the historical average would be, and the higher numbers than 1 would be warmer than historical average, and lower numbers than 1 cooler. So you can see on the temperature, as we expect with climate change, it's mostly warmer than 1. But then on the precipitation, for these winter months, it is both drier and wetter than the historical average. And so really in trying to represent the variability that we expect, you can see on these plots that it covers the 4 quadrants, the space overall. There's a coverage of dry hot, wet cool, dry cool. It has much more coverage and representing greater variability. Compare that to what we presented last month, which was a specific scenario. It's been used for a while in the county, but it is from an older ensemble of global circulation models. So it didn't represent a specific RCP because that concept was still being developed. But it's similar assumptions, but an older one, and one specific one as opposed to combination of multiple models. And that one, you can see that it's really focused in one quadrant, this dry, hot quadrant. So we ended up with much drier conditions and, as we expect, hot. So it really doesn't have the same kind of variability with this ensemble moving forward. Also comparing it to the historical catalog that's used in the Mid-County Basin. The Mid-County Basin historical catalog did have more precipitation variability than what we presented last month with the GFDL, but it doesn't have the same kind of variability with this ensemble. It's also limited on temperature because it's limited to what has been observed historically. So we think it is the most appropriate, given the feedback we have heard so far, plus the climate science as presented by Sean, to move forward with this 4-model ensemble based off of this variability. Next slide, please. So that was winter months. So summer months are represented in this slide, and I won't belabor it nearly as much as I did in the last slide. But what we're seeing here with the 4-model ensemble, this orange plot, that we have a much greater variability in precipitation over time compared to historical. While with these other 2 models, either the GFDL we presented last month, historical in blue, historical catalog in red that they use in Mid-County, that those are more consistently drier in the summer than historical. So we have some wetter months in the summer, and that's consistent with the idea that there could be longer rainy seasons, but also just variabilities. There could be less of a consistent pattern going forward with climate. So again, the variability we feel represents what makes sense to go forward with modeling groundwater in your basin. Next slide, please. So looking at the climate over time, also showing the variability, the orange line being the ensemble that we're planning to move forward with, and you can see compared to the black line, the historical, that there are many wetter months, but also somewhat drier months. So there's just a greater range in precip over time compared to historical and the other models that we've looked at, which are the green, red, and blue lines underneath. Next slide, please. And that's for precipitation. And then if you look at total precipitation in the next slide, if I advance the slide, Georgina. Thank you. If you look at the total precipitation, this chart, you can't really see it in the previous chart, like what is the average precipitation. But this chart represents it better in that it is kind of a running average over time of precipitation compared to the historical average. So it's called cumulative departure of precipitation. So when it's above zero, the running average of rainfall is basically higher than what has been observed. And so rainfall is increasing when you have these upward trends in this plot. So you can see there is a period of time where we expect higher rainfall than historically. And then it's about historical rainfall. But then in the later times, after 2050 or so, there is actually representing a long drought in that below average rainfall represented by this declining slope in this orange line. And then overall, it does end up below zero, which means overall, this scenario represents slightly lower rainfall than historical conditions. Those of you who have looked into the different global circulation model output know that most models show increased rainfall for this area than historical conditions, but there are some that show lower rainfall. And we are trying to represent that possibility with planning and also being able to plan for the potential for a long drought, as you see here. When compared to what we presented last month, this blue line for GFDL 2.1, you can see that basically it was almost always below historical, or many years, I should say, below historical average. So that's kind of a consistent decline, and it was much below the historical average. And I think that is what your feedback was based off of. And even compared to the historical catalog climate use in Mid-County, that also shows below average rainfall, below historical average rainfall. And so this is doesn't have as much dryness overall than that, but it is slightly drier than historical. If you look at any one specific more recent model, you do see this example where there is, in the green line, there is greater rainfall than historical conditions. Next slide. Looking at temperatures over time, we want to see, and all these global circulation model projections show this, so you are usually going to represent this, but you have this rising temperatures over time, just like you see in any individual model. With our ensemble is this orange line again. You can see that it does rise above where it's been historically, while any individual model would show a rise as well. Next slide. And so temperatures affect the potential for evapotranspiration, and that is called reference ET. Reference ET is basically how much evapotranspiration could happen if you had enough water. And so it isn't actual ET. You have to have enough water from rainfall or other supply sources to actually have ET meet reference ET. But it's saying basically if there is unlimited water, how much would evapotranspirate? And so it is a function of temperatures. And you can see, like temperature, it rises over time. This orange line is the ensemble that we're using. Compared to, and it rises similarly in the end to these other individual models that we've looked at. Historical catalog climate in Mid-County, that is based off of historical conditions. So it doesn't rise above historical conditions. You can see that that remains relatively flat, this red line. And so this rising potential for ET is how the temperature affects the groundwater, because if more evapotranspiration occurs, less is available for recharge to your groundwater basin. Now you will notice that this orange line ensemble we are using does start below kind of recent potential ET in recent temperatures. And so an adjustment for local differences in what the model and what observations could be made. We have tested that, and in the end, that actually doesn't make much of a difference for the groundwater basin, because as I mentioned, this is just for potential evapotranspiration, and usually there isn't enough rainfall to actually evapotranspirate this much. So the results turn out to be not that much. So we're comfortable moving forward with this scenario. Next slide, please. So this is how it is represented in the groundwater model. I think you saw these results last month. The blue line, anyway, for how much groundwater in storage is reduced over time, and you can see the effect of variability, where there is a gain of groundwater in storage in the early years. In fact, is pretty stable overall through 2040, which is the time period when you need to show that you can achieve sustainability in the basin. You want to maintain its sustainability after that. The potential for a long drought does show that there is a reduction of groundwater in storage overall time, but not nearly as much reduction as seen in the scenario presented last month, the GFDL. So I think this does address the issue of it being too extremely dry, but also provides the variability and the potential for a longer drought that will help with your planning in this GSP. And so the next slide, I think is my last slide, is just basically one of the components that go into the groundwater model that is most affected by the climate change, and that is groundwater recharge. And groundwater recharge, again, with the orange line, with the ensemble we're moving forward with, shows this greater variability over time that we expect from the climate science, and then what we presented last month. But does end up with overall greater recharge than what we presented last month, but slightly lower than what we've observed historically because of the lower rainfall, and then also the higher potential for evapotranspiration, so less available to recharge the groundwater. And I think what Georgina is going to present is like the more go into what the effects on the groundwater modeling once we get into the projects and management actions. But we think this is a scenario that does address the feedback and represent the climate science based off of the limitations we have in the time we have, not to do a full science evaluation of different climate scenarios, but combining information from multiple scenarios, forming multiple models. So I think that is the section I am to present.
Okay. Dave, let's go ahead and pause from Cameron's presentation then. I know that Georgina will be expanding on this, and so guidance from the board will be sought in a little bit. So right now, let's go ahead and go to the queue. Please, as we always do, use the chat feature. So at this point in time, Jeff Koopman, go ahead.
Yeah, hi there. So if I understand the 5099, I was looking that up on the internet trying to find it. I couldn't find it. So now I understand it a little better. So we're down, the ensemble of 4 climate models that we've chosen are down in the 10th percentile for dryness. They're in the wet percentile, 75 percentile for wetness, the cooler percentile, 50%, and the hotter percentile, 99. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So I think this is important for everyone on the board. Pay attention. This is really critical. This means that we're choosing not middle of the road climate models, not optimistic climate models, but a climate model that is 90% of the climate models suggest that it won't be as dry as this climate model is suggesting, okay? Down in the 10 percentile. It means also for the wetness, it is up in the 75 percentile, which isn't, sorry, isn't quite as far out, but that makes the variation more dramatic, which isn't beneficial to groundwater absorption, sorry. And then the cooler is down at 50%, but the hotter is up at 99 percentile. So it's the absolute hottest percentile. That means that almost all the other climate models suggest it's not going to be as hot as the ensemble that we've chosen. It's up at the 99 percentile. So it seems like I'm happier that we've chosen a combination that's gotten us an average rainfall that's higher. But what we've done is we've still chosen one that's really has a stark view of what the future is going to be starting pretty quickly. And I think this is really significant because it kind of suggests that as a board, we're supposed to spend a lot of money to reconcile and deal with this. If we choose this really kind of negative view of the future, we have to react to it and build that into our plan. There are many models with differing outcomes, and we can choose models. We're free to choose different models. We can choose models that are in the middle of the road, and they wouldn't require us to spend money right away. And we could go ahead and then see how things turn out over the next 5 years, and then the next 5 years after that, next 5 years after that, and make decisions about what to move forward on. If we choose right off the bat really negative models, then we are kind of forced to play our hand and live up to that. And I'm really concerned about that. So that's some feedback on this.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Cameron, is there any response that you would want to make to that with regards to the rationale, experience with other basins, anything like that, or shall I go ahead and proceed on to Ruth?
Sure, I can respond, and I think I think those are good points. I think it's good to understand what's going on and what you're choosing, and you do have choice. I think overall it isn't that extreme that it is pretty average with the precipitation. It is potentially on the warmer side. And just to explain kind of the range there, is like when it is dry, so half the years are basically at the 10th percentile and half the years are at the 75th percentile. So it does go back and forth between that from month to month. But overall, on average, it doesn't have that much reduction in rainfall, and it is warmer. But we can see that making it even warmer would not affect the groundwater that much. One thing, as far as the idea of having to spend a lot of money up front, there is a result from these models, and I think it's related to the emissions assumptions, is that early on, that isn't as extreme, that you do have actually an increase in rainfall in the earlier periods through the deadline of 2042 of achieving sustainability. And I think that does potentially give you the time to do what you're talking about, that the GSP should represent adaptive management. You should be able to kind of look at things from how things are going and adapt going forward, because 70 years is a long time. We don't know what it's going to look like in 10, 20 years, and you should have the option to adapt. And I think the result of the scenario does give you that option, that you do not necessarily need to react so quickly.
All right, thank you, Brandon. At this point, or Cameron, I'm sorry. At this point in time, let's move on to Ruth.
Yeah, I'm really inexperienced with climate modeling, and I saw something earlier on where you used a random integer. And I guess my question is, if it had been a different integer, would it have meant that this same pattern would have happened in a different order? Or it just seems like this, it's great if we really think that there's going to be a bunch of wet years at first, but is that just sort of random that it came out that way?
Yes, there is randomness to it, but I do think the overall pattern, you would see that in different outcomes, a similar pattern in most of them, because the source information has a lot of these models have this similar pattern. We were working in Sonoma County and ended up with, they were trying to choose one specific global circulation model to use, and did end up with one using the same emissions assumptions with a very similar pattern. Wetter earlier and then a longer drought in that later time period. So the information, the underlying information, I think leads to that pattern being pretty consistent. That isn't random. Year to year, month to month, it is definitely more not random.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Ruth. Jeff's got another question or comment, so we'll go back to Jeff, and then I don't see any other folks in the queue, so my expectation is we will move on to Georgina's portion. Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, a couple more comments. So I heard terms like that this comment, the particular climate models that we chose were chosen partially because we're based on time limitations that we have, and that they're easier to implement because because we have limited budget or whatever. And so that was part of the factor in choosing these, maybe, was because they were conveniently available. Which concerns me that we're going to go down a path that was just because it was prudent for cost reasons. The dry 10 wet 75 is not anywhere near the current kind of rainfall patterns. A dry 50, wet 50 would be in the middle of the pack. A dry 10 and wet 75 means that in half the years it's super dry and half the years it's super wet, and that doesn't work as well for infiltrating water into the ground. We see in your climate model that a lot of the rain years are below 20 inches. Historically, we have like no rain years out of 130 that are below 20 inches, and yet we've got several dozen of them in the next coming period. So this is a really stark change from what we've experienced, and not what I'm expecting. And so it's not what I would think would be a good model we should go forward with.
Jeff, let me ask you a question. This is Dave. Based on your comments and based upon what Cameron has said and prior discussions in meetings where, and as was just spoken a couple of times from various people about the inherent adaptive nature and the adaptive management concept built into Sigma, the 5-year reviews, which unto themselves are really bookends. I mean, you can be doing adaptive management anytime within those 5-year windows. It sounds like you have some concerns about this. The question I'm going to put back to you is, from a philosophy of being conservative or liberal in terms of what kind of a scenario to use to be both defensible and to set in motion some initial planning activities, knowing that those can be adapted after the submission of the GSP, what kind of a philosophy do you want pursued? If it is not something like is being presented to the consultant team, do you have a sense of an approach or philosophy you would rather see?
Yeah, I mean, I would rather see something more middle of the pack. Out of all the climate models that we have presented to us by all the different scientists, who are doing their best trying to figure this out, something that was, you look at a lot of the different models and you come up with, well, what's kind of in general consensus that, it kind of matches in the middle of all those ideas. Somewhere in the middle range of that would be, dry 50, wet 50, cooler 50, and hotter 50. It doesn't have to be perfectly 50, but a lot closer to 50 than 99 or 10. Those are way out there in the pack. I don't think in our situation we need to choose a worst case scenario because we have these 5-year updates. We don't have to. We can choose something in the middle, and that's reasonable enough for now.
All right, thank you. So that's something to put in the back of folks' mind as we go into the next presentation. I do not see any other members of the board wishing to get into the queue at this time. So at this point in time, I'm now going to move on as per our modified procedures. I'm going to open up the floor for staff. I see that Rosemary Menard, the City of Santa Cruz has a comment. I will also look to see if there's any further response that Cameron has to the this concept of sort of philosophy of conservative versus liberal as the presenter, and then we will move on. Rosemary, go ahead, please. And any other staff members, please get in the queue.
Thanks, Dave. I just want to make the comment that I do not think that the average strategy is real anymore. I don't think we are having weather patterns that exist like that. I think that our pattern is moving into the wetter wets and drier dries and more of them. So personally, I don't think an average strategy is a useful thing to look at. Just in the 8 winters I've been here, I've seen one, what might be called average year, normal year, 2016, a number of wet years, 19, 17, also a number of dry years this year, last year, 15, and a couple of critically dry years. So we're not seeing normal precip patterns anymore. And I think that having something that represents that and doesn't sort of average it all out is probably more realistic.
All right, thank you very much. At this time, I want to go ahead and check, are there any other members of staff that wish to speak? Jeff, I see your comment, but I'm going to maintain the approach that we've talked about. So at this point in time, any other staff members? Okay, I'd like to now move on to opening the floor for the public. And Jeff, I will double back around to you as per our approach, and then we'll be moving on to Georgina. So Nick, if you can please assist with opening the floor for any members of anybody on the phone and any members of the public that are present tonight. Any members of the public?
Going to start this off. Members of the public on the GoToMeeting app are calling in via computer. Not seeing or hearing any from them. And if you are a member of the public calling in tonight via telephone and you wish to make a comment or question at this time, you have been unmuted. If you're calling in via telephone, this is your time. Hearing none, seeing none.
All right, thanks very much. So now what we're going to do, Jeff, we're going to come back to you for a final comment on this presentation, then we're going to transition to Georgina. Jeff, go ahead, please.
Just a quick comment on what Rosemary said. Actually, if you go back in the historical record of California, there are lots and lots and lots of droughts, of seriously droughts. And what we're seeing currently with these droughts going on, it's just kind of a California history. And it's what we get here. And we do need to be prepared for them, definitely. But I don't think we need to use a negative climate model to take that into account. We just need to look back at history, and you'll see we need to be prudent about putting storage back in the Lompico.
All right, thank you. At this time, Georgina, we're going to go ahead and hand it over to you to take on the next portion of the presentation, please.
Okay, thank you. I had to turn my camera off, so I am having some sound issues as well, and hopefully the sound still works for the rest of the presentation. But someone send me a message if I go silent for a while. Okay, so we're going to step into looking at the baseline scenario that we have run against the 4-model ensemble. And this slide is similar to last month when I was talking about the baseline scenario assumptions that are made for the NO project. You know, the next 53 years, we are supposed to show in our GSP a water budget that goes out to 2072, and that's what we have done. But in doing that, we have to figure out what's the demand increase that happens. And I want to talk a little bit more about how we came up with these numbers here. To estimate demand, we usually would rely on a document called the Urban Water Management Plan that every 5 years the public water suppliers are supposed to, well, they do submit to DWR. And the current urban water management plans are from 2015. The 2020 ones are being worked on right now. And unfortunately, the timing is not the same as the GSP. So instead, I talked to the general managers of the 2 water districts to get an idea of what they think that their demand increases would be over the next 50 years. And so what you have here are their best guesses. The urban water management plans that are being developed, there's a joint regional urban water management plan that's being developed for both water districts together. That is going to be re-looking at that. But, you know, this modeling has to go ahead without that information because it's not ready, and this is what we have. It's not, in terms of how much does this equate to over the 53-year period, for Scotts Valley Water District, it's about an increase of 160 acre-feet over those 53 years. And for San Lorenzo Valley Water District, it's about 210 acre-feet over that period. So it's not a huge amount, but there is some increase, and for now, this is a placeholder number that we have until we have that urban water management plan, and probably in the 5-year update that would get adjusted. And every update, I'm sure every time anyone makes a demand projection, whenever they relook at it, they go, well, we were wrong that time as well. So I wanted to explain a little bit more about that, but then the last bullet obviously is the assumption that, not an assumption, but what we did was run this against the 4-model ensemble climate projection. Okay, so then you've seen this kind of water budget charts before, and I apologize that they're two next to each other, but there's a reason for this, because I do want to show the comparison between the historical period here on the left and the future projection on the right. And what I really want you to focus on more are the colors back here of the water year types. I went over this last time. The darker the color, browner colors are drier, and the blue is the wet, yellow is average. And so you can see, Karen was talking about, there is a little bit of a dry period in the future projection. Then there is this wet period here, and then it really goes between critically dry and wet. There's only 6 average years in this projection, and then towards the end there's this 12-year drought period with 2 wet years and 1 average year. And as a result, the dashed line is the next thing I want you to focus on here. That is a cumulative change in storage. You were doing pretty good for the first part, and then in the 50s, it starts, when I say 50s, this is 2050, it starts to drop down because of this very dry period. And this is kind of similar to what happened in the mid 80s, 90s. Over here, there was quite a dry period as well. And groundwater levels drop. That's where the beginning of the big decline in Lone Pico happened. The other thing to take note of is the blue bars. And so this is the full water budget. There is a lot of information on here. I recognize that, but I just want you to focus on these three things. The third one being these blue bars, which is the the recharge happening into the basin's aquifers. And so you see, because there are some much wetter years, there is more recharge happening in some of these years, especially early on. Okay. So this is a summary of the scenarios that we did run. Oh, and I should also say there are some tables, the water budget averaging tables that you have in your packet. And I'm not including these because none of you are going to remember these numbers. It's just a lot of numbers, and it doesn't really tell a story as well as some of these other slides might. So they're there for you to go back to and look at if you so wish. But now back to this slide. This is a summary of the scenarios. Like last time, we had 3 scenarios. We did the aquifer storage and recovery, and we didn't run that again because we did see that it didn't, there was no increased groundwater levels as a result of a long-term increase in groundwater levels. And so we didn't run that one again, as discussed last time. I'm going to jump now to the lower one, and that's the in lieu recharge. That was our third one last time, but now we combined it with injection. Also, you see the volume last month was about 710, and now it's less than that. It's nearly 200 acre feet less, and I'll give you the reasons for that. But really, first I want to talk about is some of the limitations that we have in trying to figure out this in lieu recharge. So I also want to give a little bit of a speech here, because there's something important you need to take into account when providing us direction on the topics of projects and management actions, and it's related to the project specifics and volumes of water that we've modeled. So when it comes to figuring out how much water is available for this in lieu recharge, the groundwater model that we've been using for groundwater modeling and its preprocessor for estimating recharge and runoff is not the ideal tool to use. It's a groundwater model. Unfortunately, there isn't a hydrologic model that we can use to estimate water availability that takes into account the climate projections here. And so we've had to use the groundwater model. It's as a stand-in, really. It's also worth noting that it wasn't actually in our scope to be figuring out how much water was available, because we weren't running a surface water model. It was a groundwater model, but we've done the best we can with what we have. And so there are just rough numbers here in front of you, admittedly. And San Lorenzo Valley Water District they did do a really good report called their Water Availability Assessment Report, and that was done in 2019, but it relies on historical climate without considering potential climate change. So that is useful up to a point. What I've also said last month, and I really want to stress this, the GSP does not have to have actual projects finalized for implementation, but it does need to know what type of projects are being considered, how they improve problem conditions, and whether they're realistic. Some GSPs have put in very unrealistic projects. We have to make sure these are realistic. There really is not enough time in the 2 years of GSP development to figure out projects completely. And we have spent quite a bit of time talking details about projects, and we will go around in circles doing that. It takes decades to develop projects. Some good advice I got from DWR staff just last week. I try and talk to them regularly, get feedback. And that is to remind you that the GSP is not a secret document with fleshed out project details. It's a plan that outlines a path to avoiding undesirable results based on best available science and data. And it will evolve. The GSP is going to evolve as new science and data become available. So just when you make comments and when you think about what I'm going to be presenting to you here, it is very easy to want to know all the details, such as where is that water coming from? That's an obvious question. You know, how is that the right amount? And at this point, because projects are not very well developed in this basin like they are in mid-county, and I have to say that mid-county is probably one of the rare exceptions in this state. Most other basins did not have projects as far along as mid-county did. So we're in the same boat as all of them. It's just trying to figure out what is it going to take to increase groundwater levels in our case, so that we don't have these undesirable results. So that being said, that's my little speech. The excess winter flows that we figured out here is 520. They're lower, like I said, and I am going to talk about them more, but they are basically 313 come from Loch Lomond, and the rest comes from these excess river flows. And I will talk a little bit about some of the constraints that we used to figure out how much that was. We combine that with the injection. the same injection scenario that we presented on last month, and that was 710 acre-feet. So that's combined. Again, the injection, the source of that water has not yet been decided. There are various options being looked at. The use of highly treated wastewater injected into the ground, that's available year round, whereas in lieu is only available in some years. And I should also point out, I do talk to the general managers regularly about this information. You know, I talk to Rick Rogers to say, you know, these are the assumptions that we're using in this calculation. Does it seem reasonable to you? I think that, you know, this number's too high. And he says, yes, you know, we haven't had excess water recently. And so not every year are you going to have excess water for in lieu. Again, these general concepts, try and keep it really high level. We can't really afford the time to get into those details. There'll be plenty of time after the GSP's submitted, and that's really when the hard work's going to start in plan implementation, when you have to actually figure out how are you going to get these projects going. In a way, that's almost harder than doing the GSP, I would think. I'm going to just go, I think I see there's a question. I am going to pause. I need a break to drink some water. So is that okay to do that, Dave?
Yeah, let's go for it. So let's go to Doug. Doug, go ahead, please.
Thanks. And Georgina, yeah, I'll try to give you some time here to get a good drink and get your throat in shape. So I appreciate I guess some observations about the injection only, observations and questions, and I appreciate the clarification that we really don't yet know where that water would come from. It's clearly a lot more water than, say, Scotts Valley produces today of recycled. So it implies that there's some project there. But this whole notion of injecting water and then not pumping it out, and maybe I'm just fixated on Santa Cruz's plans where we're hoping to be able to do some underground storage, some aquifer storage and recovery somewhere. We're kind of accustomed to the idea of using some of that water. By implication, you know, I mean, it seems like this water has to be going somewhere though, right? I mean, I guess it's getting pumped out by other groundwater users, like a soft take instead of a hard take, if you will, as accustomed to ASR, or it might be the case with ASR. I guess I could just appreciate some clarity on the, you know, sort of the operational model of this injection only thing, where that water goes. And if we weren't injecting it, you know, I guess we're back to the baseline condition, right? Where we're just continuing to overdraft the basin broadly. Am I thinking about this the right way?
Yes, you are. And if you're injecting into the Lompico, where it goes is it does fill up some of the aquifer that's being depleted. The rest of it, yes, it might get pumped, but it's being pumped, and then they're not pumping the native groundwater that they would have pumped otherwise in that area. But a lot of it actually goes under Bean Creek to the north and comes out in San Lorenzo River, where the Lompico outcrops in the valley. So it has quite a few benefits as that's happening. Yes, I agree. Putting that amount of water into the ground and not having a plan to extract it, but they're doing this, if that's what's going to happen. The idea is just to raise groundwater levels up to where there are not undesirable results, and then be able to manage the aquifer going forward at that level. Probably would need to be topped up with continuing. It's not that you would fill it up and then walk away. You would need to continue to do that. But you know, the objective is to figure out how much water does it take to keep groundwater levels up to a certain level. We've talked about not having it lower than historic levels and maybe even a little bit higher. And I think some of the charts that are coming are going to show some of that.
Okay, thanks for that. That's helpful. Follow up though, I mean, I'm going back to the groundwater budget presentation from October, and I guess I don't see that there's that substantial outflow from Lompico to discharge to creeks. So am I misinterpreting that chart, or is that flow that you're talking about that goes into the river, is that captured in the flow to other sub areas item in that water budget?
I know you'd have to look at the whole water budget, but pretty much all of that outflow to Lompico happens in San Lorenzo Valley. There's a little bit that happens in the headwaters of a few creeks up in the northern boundary, but the rest is happening there. But relatively compared to Santa Margarita, it's much smaller amount. But you know, in total, the water budget, there's about a net amount of 12,000 acre feet of base flow, so groundwater that flows into creeks. A good portion of that is from the Santa Margarita, and then a few thousand, I think, is from Lompico, if I'm remembering that table right.
Okay.
All right, let's want to keep things flowing along here. So I'd like to move on to Jack, Doug, unless there's something else you wanted to follow up on. All right, let's go on to Jack, and then after that we've got Mark. I see that Gail's the runner. So Jack and then Mark, and then I want to try to get continue on the presentation. Jack, go ahead.
Okay, great. Concerning injection only, I know we've been talking for a while about what's called Central Scotts Valley here, or El Pueblo. And I know at one point there were a number of locations that were being looked at, and maybe I'm just forgetting, but could anybody refresh my memory? Is this the most ideal location in terms of efficiency and how much we would be able to inject and location and so forth? Was this the best location?
I think that this was part of a study that was done by Kennedy Jenks a few years ago, and El Pueblo was chosen because there's property available. It's the district's property, so it's an easy option. There are other injection sites that are being looked at, and as I'll share with you, it might be beneficial to have some of those further north. You know, if more injection is needed, but we'll see the results of the modeling that we have now first.
Okay, so this is something to put into the model and see where we end up. But we're ruling out, as you mentioned earlier, that this isn't defining exactly the project. But so will there be an opportunity to consider other sites if it were feasible and beneficial?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
For sure.
All right, thank you. Let's go to Mark, please.
Yes. One comment, one question. The injection combined with the in lieu of recharge. Georgianne, I understand what you said about we don't need to figure out the source of the water for this injection yet. However, I think it's a bit disingenuous to begin to put this out there as a potential solution with the level of specificity that you have shown here for the in lieu of. These sound like reasonable sources of the water. But then to say, oh, and consider injection only, but we don't know where that more significant volume of water is going to come from. One, and then with the difficulties of doing injection, larger diameter wells going into an aquifer that doesn't have a significant permeability, the difficulties of that, and understand we're not trying to figure that out at this point, but just from a concept, doesn't seem like we're being realistic with it at this point. And the second one is on this 40 CFS for the bypass. Has that changed? Was it less than that in the last
I'm going to go into that. Yeah, sorry, Mark. I will go into that. Sorry for interrupting you. That on one of the other slides, there is some information here, but I do want to go in much more detail, especially on that 40. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And so I should also say, and Perrette can jump in here too, is that there, Scotts Valley Water District has spent quite a lot of money already looking into the feasibility of indirect potable reuse. And that is kind of this injection only scenario. So they have spent a fair bit of money already looking into it. They were about to start their EIR this year or even last year. They put that on hold. And, this is something that they are seriously considering. And so I'm not going to speak for Perrette, but it's not something that I made up for sure,
All right, so seeing that there are no other board member comments, I will go ahead and open up the floor for staff commentary. And Perrette, if you wish to speak to what Georgina just introduced, please feel free. Otherwise, we'll continue on. So any staff members wish to weigh in at this time?
I'm happy to just add a little bit to offer Georgina some backup. This is not something that she came up with. There is a tentative conceptual idea where this amount of water could come from. The reason why we chose the site, it is not only for the reason that we own most of the land and it would be easier, but also it's very close to existing infrastructure and therefore reducing the cost of building additional pipelines. So those were the two main reasons we ended up choosing this site. But it's not, we don't have any firm partnership agreements because it is a little bit higher than we could produce ourselves here in Scotts Valley. Although if we take all of it, we might get at some point close to that amount being produced in Scotts Valley. So it is relying on some partnership agreements in the future if it's determined to be the project to move forward with. That's all from me.
Okay, thank you. Any other members of staff wish to speak this time? Okay, any members of the public wish to speak at this time?
All right, members of the public, if you're calling in via telephone and you're a member of the public and you wish to make a question or comment at this time, you have been unmuted. Again, members of the public calling in via telephone. Hearing none and seeing none from the phones. Last call for anybody here joining us online on the computer. See one from Director Mayhood. Dave, back to you.
Yep, Georgina, let's continue, please.
Okay, so a little bit more information about the model scenarios. This one is not changed from last month. As we already have just talked about, there's 3 wells here at the El Pueblo yard, and that the amount of injection is uniformly distributed over the months. Okay, there's nothing much more I can tell you about that, but there is much more to talk about with the in lieu recharge options. And so I explained how we used our model in the rough way that we did to figure out the available water for in lieu. And right now we have, and in lieu, to just go over that again, means that you provide surface water in the winter months when there is excess surface water available above what the normal diversions would be, and that you use it in various wells, these circled wells. San Lorenzo Valley Water District, Scotts Valley Water District wells would be rested during the winter, and their customers would be using the surface water in lieu of pumping groundwater, allowing the groundwater to recover. It's a passive form of recharge. So on average, we would be able to get 520 acre-feet per year over this 53-year period. Some years 0, other years more than that. And that comprises 313 acre-feet from Loch Lomond, which is, that would be, and this all is in the winter months only. And then in the northern system of San Lorenzo, they have some diversions on the western streams here that could provide up to 99 acre-feet per year on average. And then down here, the Felton system up to 109. Now, and the last month we had a number that was higher than 520. It was more like 700, and that was because there are some bypass requirements that San Lorenzo Valley Water District has to operate by in order to take excess river flows during winter, and those were not turned on in that when we generated that information. So that amount was too high then, but it was also a much drier climate. So we've added in the correct constraints for the district's bypass on requirements for Fall Creek, but we also added a 40 CFS bypass requirement that is a proposed bypass flow that is part of the City of Santa Cruz's habitat conservation plan. And that means, and what it is that if flows are less than 40 CFS at Big Trees, which is down here where this white dot is, or it's actually the yellow symbol behind the white dot. If it's less than 40 CFS, there can be no diversions. And so that's why some years there is no diversion, and in total the number went down to 520. So I'm going to stop there and see if there are any questions, because I have a feeling there might be, and I did see Jeff did have one. I just want to clear this all up before we go on to the results.
Yep. Okay. So let's go to Jeff. Go to the floor again with members of the board. Jeff, go ahead, please.
Sure. Sorry for missing the plug. So the 520 number is that you came up with. That's great. But that is you took into account the projected climate change model in order to come up with that number, right?
Yes.
Okay. So if the climate change is more in the 50-50 kind of range that we choose, then the numbers would be even higher of how much water could be used, how much water would be available for in lieu.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, Gail, I'm sorry. I missed that you had that you would come back in with a comment. So Gail, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I just want to go to this statement about the amount you can take out of Fall Creek is constrained by the 40 CFS winter bypass. This is, as far as I can tell, this is a new number that is only proposed by Santa Cruz as part of their petition to change their water rights. It would have no effect on the current operating permits that we have, that is San Lorenzo Valley Water District has to take water from Fall Creek. In other words, our permits would be unchanged. And those means that depending on the time of year and the degree of drought or wetness, the bypass values are 10, 20, or 25 CFS. So you've basically accepted a value that Santa Cruz cannot impose on us, and secondly, hasn't been adopted by California. And by doing so, you've halved the amount of water that is available for in lieu. And so I think that this is not correct. And it makes in lieu look a lot less attractive than it would if you went with what the existing conditions are and what the existing permits allow.
Yeah, you're correct. It would add about another 200 to it. And yeah, I'll leave it at that.
So I guess my question to follow up is, why did you do this? Since it's not something that is law or accepted.
One of the reasons why we're also not making it very much, we're not trying to stress the system, but we want to see, you kind of have bookends, right? And so you could increase this, yes, depending on the climate change that you use, how you operate things. Yes, the 40 CFS is proposed. I did mention that too. Thank you for pointing that out, because it's an important point to make. And by including it, it is definitely a lesser amount. We do know that both the in lieu and the injection, at the last meeting we showed they had similar effects, and I would imagine that before the injection that we ran, and you'll see the results of just the injection, if it was in lieu, it would be very similar. I'm not saying one project is better than the other, and in fact you'll see later on, not one of those projects on their own can solve the problem. It does take a combination of those, and it would be much cheaper if we could get the 700 acre feet of in lieu, rather than getting injection water that's possibly treated and it's expensive. So I definitely agree with you on that.
Exactly.
You know,
exactly. So that's why I don't understand why we are adopting a hypothetical rather than what the existing conditions are.
I'm not sure we're adopting anything here. These are just, we're using them as bookends to see if we put this amount of water, what happens to the basin? If you put that amount of water, what happens? And trying to understand those consequences.
Okay, but this kind of follows on with Jeff's point earlier, is that we're taking the most extreme example, that is that somehow Santa Cruz can impose on San Lorenzo Valley Water District a bypass flow that it is trying to adopt in their own petition. And so, it doesn't strike me as very practical for the near term, for the next 5 years, 10 years. But I'll leave it at that.
Well, let me come to you, Gail, with the same question that I'd done a bit with Jeff, and also go to Georgina. To you, Gail, I'll ask alternatively then, what would you prefer to see? And Georgina, from a standpoint of risk factor of acceptability and defensibility of a GSP or lack thereof, based upon your experience with and knowledge of various basins throughout the state, I want you to listen to what Gail may respond to here, and then indicate whether you think that that's functional or whether conversely you think it's risky in the context of the policy side and the politics, if you will, of getting the GSP through DWR. But Gail, let me come first to you. Absent what's been presented here, what would you prefer to see?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Georgina has the insight into what goes through DWR, and I suspect they don't care about this sort of thing. But what I'm trying to do is get the models and the data as good as we can get them for making decisions. So I would prefer that the constraints be for Fall Creek be what they are right now on our permits. And I don't know if last time you had no constraints when you did the previous model, or whether you use the 10, 20, and 25. And in addition, as I understand it, maybe I've got this wrong, the 400 constraint, even in the Santa Cruz petition, doesn't apply to every winter month. It only applies to the days or weeks that fish are migrating up the rivers. And so if you've applied that, across the board for every winter month, that is also incorrect. So I just want to get this. I just don't understand where this just popped up magically, and it just seems odd that we would go with hypothetical instead of the real world.
Well, so Georgina, I want to come to you and see whether you would concur from a consultant perspective that this has popped up magically. And I would also like you to respond to what Gail just said with regards to my original question, which is, were this to be modified in some way, do you have a sense of whether there's a risk factor or lack thereof in terms of acceptability with DWR?
Yeah, I agree totally with what Gail said about, I don't think DWR cares. No, they probably don't. It's the locals' plan, and it's got to be real. I think what we have to come back to is realistic. And the 40 CFS, yes, it was applied this way. It may, maybe we didn't look into it enough and talk to the city about this to get more details. It was just applied across every single winter month, that winter period. And so, like I said, our model, the work we're supposed to be doing here was not supposed to be looking at water availability, coming up with these numbers. We were supposed to be provided that information, but that was not available. So we had to do with what, the best that we can. And I'm not an expert to know what's in the water rights. It sounds like you've read a lot more than I have of it. And so I can't say very much more. It probably requires some input from others for sure. And I see that Rosemary, I may have a comment coming up here, so maybe she could shed more light on that as well.
All right, well, thank you. At this time, I do not see any other members of the board wishing to get into the queue, so we will now go ahead and move on to staff comments. I see Rosemary's in the queue, and obviously I'll encourage any other staff members to get in if you so desire. Rosemary, go ahead, please.
I would like Rick Rogers to confirm what I'm about to say, but I believe this is a correct statement. The control point for the San Lorenzo's Fall Creek rights and other surface water rights in that vicinity is the Big Trees gauge on the San Lorenzo River. So I'm going to stop there and ask if Rick would please confirm that, if I'm correct.
I can agree with that our Felton water rights are tied to the Fall Creek gauge. Big Tree. Yeah,
right.
Big Trees. Right. It's getting late. The Big Trees. That is correct.
Thank you. I just want to say a couple of words about what's happening here with respect to the city's efforts in their habitat conservation plan. Whether DWR cares or not, I can't make that judgment, but I can tell you that Cal Fish and Wildlife cares, and I can tell you that National Marine Fisheries Service cares. And the agreement to change the bypass flow at Felton at the Big Trees gauge from 20 CFS to 40 CFS was a negotiated agreement between the city and those agencies specifically related to fish passage in that reach between the Tate diversion and the Felton diversion. And unlike described, it's not only on certain days. It is pretty much in the whole period of time between roughly October and the spring. There are additional requirements that the city meets for in-migration and out-migration flows, particularly following storm events. So the city's package of agreed flows, which is going to be part of its water rights change petitions that were discussed a little bit earlier, do include those changes. it may well be that that those flows have a negative impact on the Fall Creek rights. And if so, the district has the potential of being able to go in and try to work that out with the State Water Resources Control Board with respect to how they would operate those rights. I think that the expectation would be that those changes, should they occur, would need to support the fish restoration issues that the city's flows were negotiated over the last decade or so to help meet both in the winter season for the life stages that happen in in-migration, spawning, incubation, and out-migration, as well as the rearing activities that happen more so in the summertime. And with that, I will stop.
All right, thank you. Let me go to the queue again. Is there any other members of staff that wish to speak at this time? All right, seeing none, hearing none. I want to go to the public again. Let's try to make this really quick, Nick, please.
All right, members of the public, if you're a member of the public and you're calling in via telephone and you wish to make a question or comment at this time, you have been unmuted. Members of the public calling in via telephone, you're up. Hearing none, seeing none from the telephone. To the public calling in via GoToMeeting. You're on your computer.
All right, thank you.
All right, I did see another comment from Chris Perry there, Dave.
Yeah, no, I'm going back to the board now. This time we're going to go Chris Barrett, and we're going to continue on with Georgina's presentation because we've got quite a few slides to go still. Chris, go please.
Just real quick, just to sort of, for me, I see all these various ways of looking at it. This is a formula we have, and you can plug in any X factor to the formula, and you could basically see the result. So I'm not worried about some of these details to do with climate or the stream flow stuff, because you can increase it and you can just run the same thing just in your mind looking at it. But I don't think it's a bad idea, since this is something that's going to be sensitive to a lot of groups that are going to review our document, that is environmental groups, and this is something that's being negotiated. I don't think it's unreasonable to use it as a starting place. It might get renegotiated to something different. You know, there's, I just think, I don't think it's a bad idea. I think as a document, it shows sensitivity to the idea that these negotiations are going on, that this is a possibility. Whether it happens or not, we'll have to see. But I think it's a reasonable thing to do. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Georgina, let's continue, please.
Okay. Now this is the only table I'm going to show you. And just to point you to it, I'm not really going to talk at length about it at all. But at the bottom here, you see the change in storage in the green. You see, so what we have here is historical water budget averages for all the different inflows and outflows of the water budget. The current, the last 9 years, well, sorry, not last 9, 2010 to 2018. The baseline, no project. If you do nothing, what happens? If you have injection, what happens to all the different inflows and outflows? And if you have the combined project of injection plus in lieu, what are the resulting volumes of those inflows and outflows? It's going to be lost on all of us if I start talking numbers here, but things to point out is that there is more discharge to creeks when you have the injection and in lieu. In fact, it's very similar to current outflows to creeks. Then there is the most important one, and I'm going to be showing you charts. Actually, I'm going to stop right there because the charts are more informative than this table. So I'm going to move on to actually looking at hydrographs, because what we're interested in here, and I kind of lost sight of this for a little bit, is we're trying to prevent undesirable results or the significant and unreasonable impacts, right? So, and we've we've established that it's the chronic lowering of groundwater levels that's happened in the past. We want the levels not to get worse than what they have. In fact, we want them to get a little higher. So let's look at groundwater levels based off the 3 different projects. These are wells. This is one well here in Olympia. This is Santa Margarita. Remember that these projects are focused on the Lompico. So you don't see much of a change on the other side of Bean Creek when it comes to the Santa Margarita. There's a little bit of a change because the in lieu means that there is a little less pumping happening in the Olympia well field, so in some years, and so that's why you do see a little offset, but it's very, very small. More importantly is what happens with the injection only is the green line, and the blue line is the combination project. And you can see, well, definitely, this is at a location near the injection, and you see groundwater levels increase nearly 100 feet. Paseo Tempo is where there has been the area of some of the greatest declines in groundwater levels, and you can see that there is definitely an increase. I'm going to point out here that this is very low groundwater levels happening because of the increased demands due to there's San Lorenzo's surface water diversion up in their northern system being taken out. So they'll be pumping some of their wells more in the months until those diversions and infrastructure are repaired. But you know, once that heavy pumping stops, it does recover, and the injection does help it to level out that. Again, this well 10 is in kind of the heart of where the biggest declines happen. Doesn't have as much of an increase, but you do see it does go quite a bit above current conditions over there, about 25 feet. Let's see. Here we go, some more of them. Now let's, you know, I say focus on the green line here, but we're really looking at both. And you can see 3B is north of where the injection is happening. And what you see here is a result of the pumping happening at this well, given the higher groundwater elevations from injection. Let me see. I'm sure you can agree that the baseline, which is the red, has got this downward trend, and then with both projects happening, you do have it's obviously the greater amount of water is going into the ground, but just injection only in some areas is almost as good. But overall, the benefit throughout the basin is to increase groundwater levels above. In this example here, this is a representative monitoring point. So it has this dashed red line, and you can see that with the baseline, it is above it mostly, and it approaches it here. But these other ones are fulfilling kind of the desire in the basin to recover groundwater levels above what it has before. And we're going to go a bit more into some other representative monitoring points, because that's how we measure sustainability in the basin, is by these representative monitoring points where we have minimum thresholds, measurable objectives, and we want to make sure that we are meeting those criteria. And these projects do that in differing degrees in different areas. So I'm going to go, as I did last time, over the cumulative change in storage, but I want to point out that the cumulative change in storage I was using as kind of the health of the basin, but in fact I realized that it's more the groundwater levels that are important, because that's what we're used to measure how we're doing in recovering groundwater levels and avoiding undesirable results in the basin, because that's what this is all about, right? Is not having these unsustainable groundwater conditions. And we don't, and for cumulative storage, we don't have the indicator for that. It's not actually storage, it's the volume of water pumped. And we're going to be getting into that sustainability indicator in, I think, 2 months' time, if I remember right. So here, this is the basin-wide cumulative change in storage. And you can see, you know, this is the projected climate that we've been talking about. The red is the baseline. The blue here is the injection only, and the green is the combination project. And you can see that during this period, the 50 years, or I guess it's 30 years here, that we're doing pretty well with cumulative change in storage. And then in this drought period here, we have this decline. And this would happen even if there was no pumping in the basin. So this is something that that if it was to happen, the whole state would be in trouble pretty much, because, and this basin in particular feels the brunt of this because the Santa Margarita is so permeable. You know, it fills up, and so, you know, this is a combination of all the aquifers. And I don't do this graphic for each aquifer, but in general, you see when it's raining, it fills up, and then when it's dry, it drops down. It's very, very responsive to those rainfall years, and that's due mostly to the Santa Margarita, which is such a good material for recharging rainwater. But when there's no water that is available for recharge, well then, you know, groundwater levels do fall, because that formation is contributing to the flows in the streams quite a lot. So that's where its water goes almost, its first priority is to the streams, and then it goes down into the deeper aquifers to recharge those for people to pump. And that's what people do pump. I'm going to look at the change in storage in the different sub areas now, and this one shows that if you did nothing, groundwater in storage is going to fall over 7,000 acre feet over this 53-year period. If you do injection, it falls about 3,000, and if you do a combination of them, you stay above zero, and you're going to have increases in groundwater levels. So just the one project on its own, and say this was in lieu, it's not injection. The last modeling that we did showed that the injection and the in lieu of about the same amount had a fairly similar results. So here you can see the one project on its own is not going to do it. You do need two of these projects together, and in total that was about just over 1,200 acre feet per year on average. So you know, that's looking promising in that South Scotts Valley area. Let's look in the other one and the other areas up north here, the North Scotts Valley area. You know, there's not such a big difference between them, because the projects are happening down in the southern area, so it makes sense that you have the bigger response in the southern area storage. Up here in the north, you still see the decline, and it does go cumulatively below zero, meaning there's an overall loss in groundwater and storage. And then north of Bean Creek here, much less of a difference, because again, the projects are in South Scotts Valley, and but you do see a little bit, because out in this area, the in lieu does involve reducing pumping in the wintertime in some of San Lorenzo Valley Water District's wells, and you also do get, even with the injection only that doesn't involve in lieu, you do see an increase over baseline because of groundwater flowing across into this northern, in the Lompico, underneath Bean Creek and out into the sub area. So that's why you do see a little bit of a difference here in these lines. The other indicator that we're concerned about is depletion of interconnected surface water. And so we're looking here it's called net groundwater contribution to surface water. That is a mouthful. I'm just going to say base flow. That's easier. And so it looks very similar to that change in storage graphs that I showed you. This is basin wide, and the current average is around 12,000 acre feet per year. And here you can see it's almost like a river. That when it's raining, there's a lot of water going out from groundwater to the surface water. Base flow is really good. And then when it's critically dry, you're going to go below the average. It's interesting here, when it's wet or average, you get a lot of base flow. And then the years where it's dry, it goes below the average. And then overall, over towards the end of the simulation, you're getting quite a bit of lowering of base flows happening because of this. It's not because of groundwater pumping as much as it is about the lack of recharge. In South Scotts Valley area, the average probably is about 1,200 acre feet per year, and a similar pattern. The difference between the projects and baseline, it is fairly small, but been told by environmental people that even the small difference can make a difference to the creatures within the stream. So again, if it's dry, I think it's dry everywhere, and when it's wet, it's really doing well. And this flow is mostly is to Bean Creek mostly. There are a few other creeks in this area, but this is predominantly Bean Creek. Northern Scotts Valley area, if you remember last month, this chart went way below zero. There was losses of groundwater flowing to, well, it wasn't flowing from groundwater into the streams. There were quite a few years where it was flowing. It was never going that way. It was rather the surface water is recharging groundwater. So now with the changed climate projection, we only have a little bit happening down towards the end of this very dry 12-year dry period. But the combined project seems to keep things above the zero. But it's still, there are effects here from there is no projects happening here. There are small effects from the projects happening south, but not enough to keep things as high as they have been historically. And then across Bean Creek, similar pattern, much less variation again because of the project being in the south and distal from most of this basin. So if you look at what this means for groundwater levels, and I've taken a selection of the representative monitoring points. Now, to remind you, we select wells that are representative of nearby wells, and we set the metrics, and that's how the GSP is going to be, how you kind of grade the GSP is how well you're doing against these metrics. And the representative monitoring points are not well distributed across this basin. There are large parts of the basin, particularly in the northern, across from the north of Bean Creek, where there's a lot of Monterey shale formation where there's domestic wells. And the one that you see here in Quail Monitoring Well A is one of the few monitoring wells that we have in this area. There are a few, there are 4 actually municipal wells that San Lorenzo Valley, so San Lorenzo Valley Water District has. And what you see on the lines here, the red dashed line or dotted line is the minimum threshold. And then the dashed black line is actually the land surface. So we try to plot these all on the same scale. So it ends up being a little hard to see, but you do see it going down sometimes. And these are all in the Santa Margarita aquifer. So we will be using some of this information here to come up with what undesirable results are. As you see in this other one down here, it goes below the minimum threshold quite a lot of times. And because the Santa Margarita fills up very well when it's wet, and then it kind of drains over time, and if it's dry, it just keeps draining, doesn't fill up. You do get these fluctuations. And so in some aquifers, you could say, well, we never want to go below this line, but I think that's unrealistic when it comes to setting the criteria for the Santa Margarita. I think because of the nature of it filling and drying up so much, that we will talk about this probably in the next meeting, but you may allow in a very dry year for it to go below the minimum threshold, knowing that in a very wet year, it's going to fill up. And I think it's unrealistic to try and manage it to just that minimum threshold. But that's an aside. I'm getting excited because that's another topic that we eventually get to talk about, is finishing off those sustainable management criteria. But anyway, so what this is showing is that, yes, you do get these ups and downs, but I don't think that's going to be terribly bad if we take the approach I just described about setting the undesirable results in the Santa Margarita. And when it comes to the Lompico, well, obviously we're injecting or doing all the in lieu recharge into that aquifer, so naturally we have the biggest benefits there. And you can see that when you have, this is in the Pasillon-Tempo well field area, we have the minimum threshold, and the baseline and the injection only go below that, but the combined project stays above it. And all of them, the combined project does stay above it. The baseline goes below it just about on all of them. And the injection, as you go further north, where the injection is happening more in central, so it does affect the northern part, you do see a bigger impact from that as well. So we're doing very well here. And this really suggests to me that the combined project actually achieves the goals we set out for this area in particular, of having groundwater levels above historic levels and even a little bit higher. Here we have levels at 75, 80 feet above if we did nothing. So in summary, the biggest impacts are in that southern area where the projects are happening. The northern Scotts Valley area does have some benefits, but is not able to counter the climate that we've modeled it against. And then the northern area, it does have declines, and those are related not to over pumping or anything. It's mostly because of lack of recharge. The Monterey Shale is a shale. You can imagine it's very hard to recharge something like that. And so groundwater levels and storage are being reduced over time with the multiple years of dry and the extremes that are happening. So I do worry about the private well owners up in that area, especially because there are no representative monitoring points in that area. We are planning to put in some new wells, some monitoring wells specifically in the Monterey to look at this, but right now we don't have anything to set the sustainable management criteria to in that area. And we don't know what the historic levels were. We're only going to know what they are now and going forward in time. So things to consider when we are thinking about our last model scenario is that the in lieu and the injection scenario, they really do increase groundwater levels in the area that we have the problem. If, in our focus area document, we talk about the South Scotts Valley area where the biggest declines have happened. Those are clearly undesirable. We don't want those, but with this combination of projects, we are able to increase levels. Also, the amount of available excess surface water for in lieu use is relatively fixed, and it's not fixed to the 520. It's, you know, some years you can have it and some years you can't have it, and there's likely a upper end to what you can achieve, and that upper end is fixed, and there are some constraints. Then the amount of injection that can take place can be increased if you increase the injection locations, like was mentioned by one of the directors earlier. You can put them in different places, and you can target just that aquifer. Now, as I mentioned, in lieu is much cheaper, and that's by far the preferable option to use. But in combination, it looks like we would need the two projects in combination, or much bigger of one of them. Another thing to consider is that we are seeing those decreases in groundwater and storage in this northern area. And I just mentioned it. I'm going to reiterate that we're not having undesirable results in this area, but the threat of climate change is going to reduce recharge in this area and cause those declines to occur. The amount being pumped in this area is only 950 acre-feet per year in total, and that's municipal. There's a quarry here. That's all the private domestic pumping going on. We estimate it to be about 34% of total basin extractions in this huge area out here. Okay, so like I said, we have one more scenario that we can look at as our kind of bookend. And I think you guys got it after my speech that they're not actual projects that are being run, but we're trying to look at the volumes and methods of recharge that benefit the basin most. And we've talked about that today in various topics, that we don't have to have these PMAs finalized for implementation, and that there's adaptive management. If we realize we have the wrong climate, or it's, you know, I can guarantee you we have the wrong climate. Every year we'll update the model with the true climate, and at the 5-year updates, we can decide, is this the right climate or not? What are the trends happening? And our focus is always going to be on what can we do to help the basin reach its sustainability goals and metrics, because it's not going to do it on its own. That much is clear from the baseline data. So I would like feedback from you all on you know, not project specifics, but where you think, you know, do you think that we've addressed not addressed, but we've been able to provide some kind of solutions to the problems that you identified in the South Scots Valley area? That northern area, do you think it needs a little bit more help? And then the area north of Bean Creek, is that an area of concern right now? You know, what kind of projects could you imagine there? That's a very big area, and just things to think about when we do this other model scenario. But also, I need to point out, this is not the end of all scenarios. This is just for this first GSP, which is not going to be perfect. DWR does not expect it to be perfect. There's been, in my discussions with them, they point that out to me often. So, and I think I've passed that along to you as well. So there are chances, you know, there are also, like I said, the agencies need to work on the exact specifics of their projects, and then there'll be opportunities for you all to chime in there, I'm sure, because this is just the beginning of the process of sustainability. It's not the end. Okay, Dave.
Okay, you've put a lot of variables out there, Georgina, so this is going to be a little complex here. I need some guidance from you. I've seen the email that you had sent to me, and I got to be honest, I'm not totally sure I understand it with regards to the key question that we've got to put to the board. Right now, we need to open up the floor like we've been doing for questions and comments. But when we circle back around and get guidance from the board to this question, which is of additional scenario, you just put a lot of variables out there. I mean, we've got the climate modeling variable. So I need to get some guidance from you after we do Q&A as to how we're going to parse that out. Are we testing out general support of the climate model, or are we not? Are we looking for board members to come forward with a specific proposal of a new scenario? Do you have a scenario you want to put out for consideration? We've got to get some structure to this. So I'm just putting that out there to you, Georgina, to be thinking about right now. Let's open up the floor. I see Jeff's got a question. So Jeff, go ahead, please. Or a question and a comment.
Yeah, actually, I'm sorry, three different ones. We've talked about how this is all flexible and we can keep changing things after we've made decisions, but I was struck by a couple months ago when we tried to go back and revisit one of the things. Dave, you said that, okay, well, we can't revisit things because we don't have enough time left. And I forget the wording you used, but it is once we go forward, it's going to be harder to go back. So we do need to make the right choices. I want to mention about, point out or ask Georgina about if, obviously if the climate scenario that we have chosen here wasn't in play, then I want to make sure that the board is all aware that we would have the more like the 720 acre feet per year from the in-lieu project, and it would be comparable to the injection. So there would be the injection and the in-lieu would be about the same results. Obviously, if you use both of them, you would get the benefit of both. But if you had either one of them, they would achieve the same results if climate change wasn't so stark as what we had used in this model, right? I guess, and then the other point was that, so there was the conclusion that we have to use both. You stated that we needed both in order to reach our end goal, whereas that is all based on this climate model again. So if we use a 50-50 climate model, then we don't necessarily need to use both. So I think the conclusion was predicated on the climate model, and we're not necessarily clear that we want to go with that climate model until we collect information from everyone about how they feel about it. Because if we use maybe just one of them, for instance, the in-lieu, we might actually be above where we are today and have solved all of our problems. And like you say, it's much cheaper and easier to implement. So I guess those are my points, unless you have any comments on that.
May I respond, Dave?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. And, developing these projects takes years, and the in lieu probably is going to happen first, and it's almost like a phased approach. You'll see how does that help. You only know what the long-term impacts when there's been long-term, so it's going to take some time. But all of these water districts have to have resiliency in their water supplies, as well as protecting the basin. So they are always going to be looking out for their customers and figuring out, in these urban water management plans, they have to show that they have these backup plans if something goes terribly wrong. What do they have in their back pocket? And these projects, the suite of projects that we're going to include in the GSP, may be the answer to some of that. So obviously the cheapest stuff is what we're going to go for first, and that's for sure. I don't think these projects all are going to get developed at the same time. There's going to be careful thought, and there's partnerships like Perret talked about. No one can do any of these projects completely on their own. They all require a lot of work and consideration. And they're not just going to do it because the model says it. I definitely don't think that.
All right, let's go to Chris. Terry, please.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think this works for me because I can move the pieces around the chessboard. And I understand that, yeah, we're talking about this much water, and it might come from this part, from in lieu. Some might come from injection. The climate might be wetter, the climate might be drier, but I can see exactly how all those outcomes would work just conceptually. So I think that's what we're looking for. And I don't think what we're talking about when we say about going back, we're not talking about making changes once we get through this part of the process. And I really do also believe that our plan would be looked upon better by the department if we are taking not a rosy view of everything's going to stay the same. It might. I'm not convinced I've seen a complete breakdown of traditionally unpredictable California rainfall. Jeff shared some records with me, and I've got records going back to 1947, and I still think we're essentially seeing the crazy variability that this area always has for precipitation. That being said, I don't personally mind, or I don't think it's going to make our plan look bad to the people who are going to be teasing it, because people are going to be looking to poke holes in it. And I don't mean like even everyday citizens, but environmental groups, the state. They're going to be trying to say, hey, you guys aren't really being realistic here. You're thinking, you're taking too rosy a view. So I think it's fine to take a more negative view, knowing that, like Georgina says, this is going to happen in phases. We're not going to make a commitment to do some giant project right off the bat. I think it's better to have something that is going to look like we were trying to imagine what would happen if the you-know-what really hit the fan.
All right, thank you. In the queue is Doug, and then Jack, and then Jeff.
Thanks, Dave. I guess I've got a few comments to offer that maybe cover both the items you'd put forth, Georgina, in terms of wanting to get some feedback on the climate stuff, as well as what questions still seem to be open with respect to our remaining opportunities to do some modeling. I'm gratified and frankly encouraged by what we're seeing from the modeling results in the South Scotts Valley area. It gives me, I guess, like Chris, maybe conceptual validation that some combination of in lieu and some form of injection, and maybe even some ASR injection and some modest extraction afterwards can get us where we need to get to. Just on a mass balance basis, I don't think the difference between 500 and 700 is meaningful for this conversation. It's clear from the modeling that injection of 700 doesn't get the job done. So I'm convinced we are going to be looking at a suite of projects, probably in most areas. So building on that, I'm still unclear on the total volume of water that we need to work with here in order to fix all the problems in the basin. So we've got issues in the North Scotts Valley area, and we've got potential emergent issues in the area north of Bean Creek, which, as Georgina pointed out, is problematic from a PMA perspective, or at least from a P perspective, project perspective, given the geography up there. But I guess I'm mindful that it also seems clear that this water has to come from somewhere. As Perrette mentioned, it's going to involve some partnerships, almost inevitably. I think we need to understand the total amount of water we need to get into the system, and I don't understand that yet. Maybe it's there doing some math against the baseline stuff, and if that's the case, then that's cool, but that's an open question for me. And then the second one, again, is geographically, where do we need to do this work, both along the surface and then vertically, in terms of which aquifers we're going to try to work on. So if it's possible to get some more clarity about that, so we at least understand the magnitude of the problem that we're confronting over the next 20 years to reach sustainability, and then 50 years of managed sustainability, then I'd be a happy camper. As regards to the climate model, I guess, as I'm reminded, hope is not a strategy, and sometimes facts are inconvenient. And I think it'd be lovely if we could have predict a climate that was going to be conducive to our least cost solution. But I'm not comfortable as a responsible board member doing planning based on that kind of assumption. Rather, I think we have I'd say a moral obligation to protect against the downside risk. And if that means that we look at a somewhat less rosy scenario than might otherwise be the case, we can sleep at night knowing that we've protected the public good that we've charged to do. On the other hand, there's a real trap of picking a model that is too optimistic, and then we end up with a worse problem to have to solve, and maybe a more exigent problem to have to solve. So I'm highly sensitized towards guarding against the downside risk here. And I'd also note that the board directed at the last meeting that we wanted a wetter, warmer scenario, and staff provided us that. So I'm kind of inclined to go with the work that staff did here. I'm pretty persuaded by it. And that's what I got dug out.
Okay, Doug, I've got a question for you before I continue on to Jack. When you talk about the overarching questions that are still in your mind about the how much water and the where, are you saying that in the context that that's what you're hoping a next model scenario will assist you on? Or are you saying that you don't know how to suggest a next modeling scenario until you get some answers to those two questions?
No, I'm hoping that either modeling or calculations based on the work that we've done so far, informed by the wisdom that staff has developed in the work, can answer those questions. And I'll leave it to staff to be able to direct which path might work.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to Jack, please, and then to Jeff.
Okay, yeah, I have a couple of comments, a couple of questions. First, I kind of agree with Doug about, I'm wondering too about what our goal is, how much, and I recognize the graphs project, how we're doing relative to baseline and relative to history, but just sort of what's our goal in some sort of quantitative way to increase the water level, X feet or something I could easily understandable. Secondly, even though I don't want us to spend money we don't have to spend, I certainly agree also with Doug that it's better to have spent more and not run out of water than to spend less and run out of water. So I would rather err on the high side of water as well. I'm wondering about, I heard the term phasing of projects. So assuming for the moment that we do both in lieu and injection, when the plan gets completed, would we show that phasing in? In other words, would we show, if we did choose both, would we show one of those starting, say the in lieu starting first, and then would we show the injection starting later? That's a question. And then my last question is just, is there a place for efficiency here? I know we've kind of, on the list of projects we can do, there are efficiency measures, and I recognize we're already doing a lot, but is there a place to talk about more efficiency measures beyond in this plan, or is it just too small? Is the real issue we do have to increase water? So really my main question is just about the phasing.
Okay, so Jack, with regard to the phasing, I understand your question. I understand the broader question about the impact that efficiency exercises might take, but I would argue that efficiency efforts fall into the category of PMAs. It's, an efficiency step is some type of a project or a management action. So getting back to the question at hand about this outstanding remaining model scenario, I'm not sure that that the answers to those questions you have right now are going to come from this. So if we could please stay focused on this, because I got to get you all to a point where you're going to give guidance to staff.
Okay, good point. Thank you for keeping me on track. Okay, so really my question is just about, and I do like the concepts of movable pieces, and as Chris pointed out, looking at it like chess, or I would say Scrabble. But I'm still just wondering about when we show this in our report, will we be showing charts and graphs that might show a phasing in at a different point for one of the two projects?
Okay. Let's go to Jeff, and then we're going to go to Chris, and then we'll check in and see whether staff has got anything to weigh into this. I am going to be eventually circling back around with a couple of fundamental questions that we're going to kind of go around the horn, and I'm going to ping every board member about, but we're not quite there yet. So Jeff and Chris.
Okay, yeah, hi. So some agents, some agencies are in different situations than others. And, if we choose a worst case climate scenario, then it might cause us to do more water projects than less, which would benefit them based on their situation. Other agencies, other categories of us might not be in that situation. I want to point out that the 50-50 idea is not looking back and saying that things are gonna be like we've experienced them in the past. The 50-50 says that for all the dire predictions of what's going to happen going forward, all the scientists that have predicted how horrible it's going to get, we go with the wisdom of the crowds and we go in the middle of that. And so it's saying we don't take the worst case of all those scenarios. We don't take the best rosy case of those scenarios. We go in the middle and we go, well, what is the general consensus of where we're going to head with the climate scenario? That's the 50-50. It means that things are going to get worse. Things are going to get hotter. Rain's going to become more intermittent. All those problems are going to occur. They're just not going to occur quite as dramatically as what's been modeled here.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to Chris.
And then the answer to Doug's question about how much water are we talking about, isn't it just the combination if we're talking about doing the, the in lieu and the injection, you add up those two totals, that's the number of acre feet we're talking about. Is that your question, Doug?
Well, that was for that one sub area, Chris.
Yeah.
We didn't see improvement in the other sub areas, and
oh right, okay, well yes,
that's what I was getting to, is that geographically there's some other areas we need to understand.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay, I do not see any other members of the board in the queue at this time for questions of clarification or initial ideas. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and go to staff and consultants for questions or comments themselves. I know that Cameron is in the queue already to make a point of clarification, so we're going to do that. And then we'll do the same drill we've been doing. So Cameron, go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you. So I do want to clarify something about the ensemble and the concept of a 50-50. In the end, that would just be a 50th percentile ensemble, which I think that is what Jeff is talking about. But that doesn't have the variation from wet to dry years that we are aiming for. So the idea is to try to get something that is higher during what is on average a wet year and lower on what is a dry year, to get some of the variability that we do expect, as opposed to going in the middle every year. So there is an effort to have that variability and go beyond 50-50. I can understand any concerns about specific numbers to be used, but doing something other than specifically 50-50 is an objective that is consistent with what we've learned about the climate science.
All right, thank you. Jeff, I'm going to have you hold on for just a minute there. I want to check and see if there's any other members of the staff that wish to weigh in at this time. Okay.
Dave, I can respond to some of the questions that have been asked. Do you want me to do
Yes,
that now
please.
or later?
No, I would like
Okay.
you to do that now, please.
Yeah. So how much, what the volume of water is that's involved in totality here. So we have an idea in South Scotts Valley, right? In northern part, there aren't very many production wells in that area that we can use for in lieu. So that's where I think if we pushed up the injection a little further north, that could possibly address that issue. And that modeling we haven't done. So that's an option for some future modeling. And then when it comes to the area north of Bean Creek, as Doug rightly pointed out, the projects are going to be hard to do there. It is going to be management actions. And this is something that we have not really considered because so far we've only been looking at problems that have happened historically. So this is kind of a new thing that's come up. And we do have to look at potential management actions. I'm going to have to get together with our sub-consultant to look at that, and Sierra, who's in helping us out with these projects and management actions. Something we're going to have to get back to you. I have no answer for you right now. And then on Jack's question about how do we decide, how much recovery, basically, he was saying. I think when we talk about the cost-benefit analysis of these different projects, and you get an idea of the cost, that's going to help guide us there.
All right. Okay, I want to go ahead and are there any other members of staff that wish to weigh in at this time? All right, seeing none, Nick, let's go ahead and go to public very quickly, please, and then we're going to come back around, and then I'm going to do more of the polling exercise going to the members of the board for a couple of key questions.
All right. If you're a member of the public and you have a question or a comment on anything that's just been discussed and you are calling in via telephone, if you're a member of the public calling in via telephone, this is your opportunity to comment. Hearing none, seeing none from the phones, double checking members of the public calling in via internet. Seeing none, hearing none.
Okay. So what we're going to do at this point now is come back around, and I have the list of members that are present or were present at the beginning of the meeting that I'm going to now go around the horn on. The first question that I'm going to pose is related to the climate smart scenario. As was stated, obviously, there was an extensive discussion at the last meeting. There was direction by the board to come back with a different approach. Doug actually restated that just a couple of minutes ago. You have seen that presentation. We have heard some various comments and discussion about it, both in favor and lack thereof. At this point in time, we either need to get a green light in general initial terms that it's acceptable for the time being, or we need to get direction to the board by a majority, or direction to the consultant team by a majority of the board members to go back to the drawing board and take another crack at things. So with that, what I'm going to do is, basically the question is, do you support the modified climate model as has been presented, or excuse me, the modeling scenario, or do you wish to see a revision? So I'm just going to go through the list that I have. These are not in any particular order other than what I have here. Doug, go ahead. Do you support the current proposal that the consultants team brought forward, or do you wish to see a further revision to the scenario?
I support the proposal that we've looked at tonight.
All right, thank you. Supervisor Koenig?
Sorry about that. Yeah, I support the scenarios that we have in front of us. I do not need to see an additional climate scenario. Thank you.
Thank you. Bruce McPherson? Supervisor McPherson? I'll continue. I'll come back around to Supervisor McPherson. Cassidy?
I do not support the 50/90. I would prefer a 50 with some sort of an insertion of a VIX or volatility effect.
All right, thank you. Jeff Koopman?
Yeah, obviously I agree with that. And I want to point out that a 50/50, any 50/50 is in the middle of the pack of would have volatility in it, because all reasonable models going forward show volatility. It's just the average amount of volatility that the models are talking about, not the extreme volatility that we have in this model that's being presented.
Okay, thank you. Dale?
I guess I wish that they'd chosen something that wasn't quite as extreme. For example, the 10 model ensemble that CalAdapt has, which makes it wetter. And it's also, to me, easier to just justify, since that's what CalAdapt does. But I don't know if it's really worth running, just running new models just for the climate stuff. I think we could basically argue that what we have now is really the worst case scenario, given the 50/99, and also the fact that they're using our CP 8.5, which is also the most pessimistic CO2 and temperature increase model.
All right, thank you. Dale Pollock?
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, I'm in support of the climate scenario that's being proposed.
All right, thank you. Jack Dills?
I support the modified approach that's being presented.
Thank you. Mark Smalley?
I am okay with the climate scenario as proposed.
Thank you. Ruth?
I support what we've been proposed. This is out of my ballpark, and I'm supporting what the people brought to us who have the most experience in this field.
All right, thank you. And I'm going to double back around to Supervisor McPherson. Are you with us? Okay, hearing none. By a simple majority, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We have 8 members supporting the proposal and 2 members against. So from a simple majority approach,
I'm for it too, Dave.
Pardon me. Oh, Chris, I'm sorry. I didn't come to you. I'm sorry, Chris. Sorry.
Okay. I don't insult easy.
All right. My apologies.
I have muted this Bruce.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Supervisor McPherson.
I was on mute. Sorry.
Okay, so the question is whether you support the proposed climate model or not.
Yes.
You do. Okay. All right. So we have 2 members of the board that would prefer something different, and the rest of the members of the board present tonight are supporting the proposed approach. Therefore, from a simple majority rule, that's going to be the working assumption there will be no direction by the board to proceed, but for the consultant team to proceed with any additional work or another revision. So at this point in time, we're then going to move on. I'm going to look to Georgina. I know that basically we've got 3 questions that are somewhat geographically based, focusing on the southern part of Scotts Valley, the northern part of Scotts Valley, and then the question that she spoke of a little while ago about north of Bean Creek. So Georgina, I'm going to look to you to pose some concise, straightforward questions that we can then sort of go around the horn on, kind of in a support or don't support kind of approach. If you're looking for an actual proposal, then I'm going to look to you, Georgina, to come up with a recommendation, or otherwise a board member to do so in your stead. But let me go to you and hear what the first question is that you want to make sure we get posed.
Okay, the first question is, the volume modeled in South Scotts Valley is the upper end that avoids undesirable results. Do you agree with that?
Okay, say that again. You got a little muted there at the beginning.
Do you agree that the volume modeled in South Scotts Valley is the upper end that avoids undesirable results?
Okay, so the volume modeled, does it represent the upper upper end of the limit.
Yeah. Because I think that
Okay.
there is a chance that we can go lower than that if we were to fine tune and turn all these knobs, that there may be some lower number, but you know, this is clearly above when it comes to the Lompico in the South Scotts
Okay.
Valley area.
All right, do we have any questions from the board members before I go around the horn for further clarification on this question? I just want to make sure everybody kind of understands the question before I go around the horn. Does anybody have any questions about it, about what Georgina's just asked? Dale, okay, we're going to go to Dale and then to Eden and then to Ruth. Dale, go ahead, please.
Well, my question is that
understand what she's
I'm
asking.
I'm not quite understanding exactly what the question is.
So I just abstained because I really don't know it. She said it twice and I still don't understand it.
Same here.
All right.
Okay, sorry, so the volume of recharged water that we have put into the model combined with the two projects, injection and in lieu of, I think the total is like 1,210 or something. Is that, would you consider that the upper end of the volume required to avoid undesirable results? So meaning, an undesirable result, sorry, it's terminology, to stop chronic lowering of groundwater levels, I should say.
I think, is that enough? Do you want to go with
Is
a
that
scenario that has even
right.
more?
Yeah.
If I'm
Okay. Ruth, you want to, Ruth, are you asking a question, or are you saying you want to take a crack at restating the question, Ruth?
I'd like to restate it. Is this amount of water going to get the job done?
Excellent.
Okay, the job, again, the job being defined as what?
Avoiding, I forget the phrasing,
undesirable
avoiding bad results.
Yeah.
Okay, so is the volume of water being modeled sufficient, in your opinion as a board, to avoid an undesirable result in the southern portion of the Scotts Valley? Georgina, is that the right question?
Yes, that's, Dave, you're very good at it. Yes.
Okay, so is the amount of water currently being modeled for sufficient, in your opinion, to avoid an undesirable result in the southern part of Scotts Valley, or do you wish to see a different modeling scenario with a higher or lower amount of water? I'm going to run through some of the people that have gotten the queue. Eden, I know that you had posed the question of yes, as did Ruth, and I think that was reflecting perhaps you were still not sure what the question was. Eden, are you clear? Okay, good. Thank you. Very good. All right. Any other questions from anybody on the question? Which I know is redundant. Okay, Doug, your opinion?
Yes.
Okay, you think it's enough?
Yeah.
Or you think it's sufficient? Okay, thank you. Supervisor Koenig?
Yes.
All right. Supervisor McPherson?
Yes.
Thank you. Director Cassidy?
Yes.
Thank you. Director Koopman?
Yes, not necessarily requiring these particular projects, but yes, that amount is probably adequate.
Thank you. Director Pollock?
Yes, I would agree.
Thank you. Director Dillis?
Yes.
Thank you. Director Mahood?
yes.
Thank you. Director Smalley?
Yes.
Thank you. Director Stiles?
Yes.
Thank you. Director Perry?
Yes.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, Georgina, so that means that that bit of guidance has now been provided to staff. Georgina, let's go to the next question and let's see if we get that as a clear, concise one.
Okay. Does the North Scotts Valley area need additional recharge from injection?
To avoid an undesirable result?
Yes, same thing.
Okay, does the North San Joaquin, does the North Scotts Valley need additional recharge?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, does the North Scotts Valley need additional recharge to avoid an undesirable result? For the purposes of, again, we're talking about the modeling scenarios. So same thing, Director Engfer?
I'm going to pass for a minute. I need to think.
All right, Director Koenig?
Well, I'll say no is the simple answer. I mean, again, I'm assuming there could be additional projects that we consider in the future. I mean, basically, my understanding is this is a pretty leaky bathtub in this basin, and so it doesn't seem to me that we should be injecting a bunch of water in areas where it's particularly likely to leave the basin. So, short answer, no.
Thank you, Director McPherson.
Yeah, I'm going to say no as well.
Thank you, Director Cassidy.
No.
Thank you, Director Koopman.
No, I don't think it's required to do this.
Thank you, Director Pollock.
No, I don't think so. Now, well, is this in any particular aquifer, or is it just in the basin as a whole?
Sorry, it's in the Lumpico aquifer. All of this is in the Lumpico.
All in the Lumpico. Georgina, can you point back to any slide that can clarify what's going on based on what you're proposing?
Yeah, it's this area up here. The reason why I bring this up is that the flows to the base flows to creeks, it gets pretty low, but also I think this is the main driving force behind that, is that the base flows to creeks gets reverses. You don't get base flows in the very dry years. Obviously, if we don't have a 12-year drought, then that's unlikely to happen. But there is that potential, and Director Koenig's point about it being leaky is very true. But in this area, groundwater that you recharge in this area, some of it is going to go to the creeks, but most of it flows in the Lumpico. It flows down into the southern area and then across north into San Lorenzo River. So if you are recharging up in this area, you get the benefit in South Scotts Valley as well as in this area itself.
Are we staying above minimum thresholds with the current scenario in that area? I can't remember.
Here we are. This is one well that's fairly far north, and it does, yes.
Okay. All right, then I would say.
In terms of groundwater levels, yes, but I think that there may be the impact to the streams, but I probably don't have enough information at this point to tell you that for sure.
Okay, I think based on that, I would say no.
All right, thank you. Director Dills?
No, but I would like to keep it in our back pocket.
Okay. Director, there'll be a secret appendix. Director Mahood?
No.
Director Smalley?
No.
Director Stiles?
No, but I think we're going to keep an eye on it as the 5-year updates come along.
All right, Director Perry?
No.
And Director Engfer, I'm going to come back around to you.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate everybody's patience. I'm going to be sort of equivocal about this. Injection doesn't excite me much here because of the expense, but there might be other strategies that help us avoid flirting with these minimum thresholds, maybe some management actions or something. So if that's keeping it on the table, consistent with what some other directors have said, then that's fine. So if you want to put me as a moderate yes, But with an asterisk, I'm really reluctant to inject unless we absolutely have to because of the expense.
We'll put you in the I can live with it mode. All right, Georgina, let's move on to the last question you want to get posed, please.
The last one is to do with the area north of Bean Creek. And that is kind of a proposal I have here is to direct staff to look at potential PMAs in the area north of Bean Creek, because as I mentioned, we haven't really done that yet. Is this something you want us to do?
Okay, but the PMAs meaning just a suite of potential PMAs, or is there anything particular you want them to be weighing in with this answer?
No, again, do they want us, it's kind of the same as that North Scotts Valley area. The answer could also be that you, let's see in the 5-year updates, let's just keep an eye on it.
Well, let's not make this more complex, because I gotta use binary questions here to get an answer for you all. So the bottom line is, the question is, does the board want to direct staff to look at PMAs now in the north of Bean Creek area? That's the question, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So does the board want to direct staff as part of this remaining modeling scenario to look at PMA options in north of Bean Creek? Director Angfer?
Yes, I'd like to understand a menu of potential management actions.
Okay, and let me remind folks again that from a consensus-based model, and as is indicated in my email, you can say yes or no, or you could say you can live with it, not unlike how Doug did earlier. From a collaborative consensus-based approach, either a yes or I can live with it is going to fall into the category of consensus of support, and a no, again, we're not trying to aim towards unanimity here tonight, we're just trying to move the ball along. But if you would prefer to be on the record as showing that you weren't in a full support, but rather you could live with it, that's fine, as per my email. So, Doug, are you a yes, or are you going to live with it?
Well, I'm sorry to be difficult here, Dave, but I thought in the previous conversation we had commented that projects up here would be almost impossible to do given the geography and where people are spread out. So I thought I had heard, and maybe I misheard Georgina say that it's more likely to be dealt with via management actions, and that's why I framed my response the way I did. I can absolutely support management actions. I guess you could say I could live with projects, but I can't imagine what they would be.
Okay, Georgina, let's come back to you. I mean, the term, to be pedantic about it, the term that Georgina brought forward was PMAs, which is going to stand for projects or management actions. So your point then is duly noted. You would be in support of management areas, you're dubious about projects. Supervisor Koenig?
Yes.
Thank you. Supervisor McPherson?
Yes.
Thank you. Supervisor Cassidy?
I'm interested in management actions, not more projects in that area.
Thank you. Did I just say Supervisor Cassidy? If I did, I need to. Director Koopman?
Yeah, I don't know of anybody having problems in that area. So until we did, I would say no, not at this time.
All right. Okay. Director Pollack?
I would say no.
All right. Director Dills?
Yes.
That was a yes?
Yes.
Thank you. Director Mahood?
No.
Thank you. Director Smalley?
I would be interested in seeing management actions proposed, but I don't know that it needs to go through the full model analysis. I'd like to see what they would suggest could be considered there.
All right. Thank you. Director Stiles?
I'd like to see staff concentrate on getting the sucker out the door, but I can live with it if they come up with some stuff to look at. So that's an overall, I can live with it.
Okay. Director Perry?
Yes. I'd like to see what they have to advise.
Okay, so from a numeric count, we have support for staff to be looking at that with a strong caveat by several members that they would prefer that the focus be placed on management areas rather than projects because they are not convinced that projects are really worth the while to be spending a lot of analytical time on. Okay, we therefore have guidance from all board members. Thank you as we're embarking on this more consistent and structured approach to get things. Georgina, is there anything else that you need? I want to try to get us, we still obviously have the, I see that there's a couple of questions and comments, or maybe I'd missed because I was handling the count. Mark, I want to come back to you in case you weren't already answered. And then we do have a presentation by one of your fellow board members from Jeff Koopman. But Mark, did you get your question answered earlier? Or do you still wish to, or I'm sorry, did you get something resolved that you want to make a comment to, or do you still want to speak right now on a comment? Which is fine. I missed you. I apologize.
That's okay. No further comments.
All right. Thank you. Georgina, is there anything else that you wish to go through?
Oh, I think everyone's had enough of me, so I'm gonna hand it over to Jeff Koopman.
Never enough.
I can be ever getting enough of that lilting South African accent of yours. Okay, so I'll go ahead and introduce Jeff. Jeff has been a real trooper. Jeff has been, as you all know, is a deep thinker, has been doing a lot of deep thinking. He had brought forward and had talked to staff and consultants about some ideas that he had and things that he feels are worthy of the board to consider and weigh in on. So with this, I'm going to hand it over to Jeff to go through his presentation. We've got about 20 minutes targeted for this total, including his presentation and me opening the floor for Q&A. And then the question I'm going to pose is, do you support at some point in time in the near future consideration of the approach that Jeff's bringing forward to you? So that's going to be the question I'm going to come around to you on. But with that, Jeff, go ahead.
Okay. So I guess this is a discussion about a possible additional project and management action. I don't understand those terms very well. It's an in lieu conjunctive use idea that's a little bit different than the one that we've been proposed here tonight. Go ahead and next page. I don't have control yet. Okay, so the goal tonight is to describe this conjunctive use plan, list its benefits and cost impacts, and at the end, you guys will decide if the plan merits being considered for, I guess there's one last item that we can study that we have in the budget. Okay, go ahead next. Okay, here's some terms that you're all familiar with, the abbreviations for the different water districts, and such, and Santa Maria Aquifer and San Lorenzo Rivers, SLR, and the GSP's the sustainability plan. Next page. Okay, conjunctive use you're familiar with. It's the idea of sharing across system boundaries. For instance, San Lorenzo Valley and Scotts Valley, or in with Santa Cruz, to achieve desired benefits. And then in lieu recharge, we've mentioned earlier tonight, is where you rest wells and allow them to recharge naturally. GDEs you've heard about before, the groundwater dependent ecosystems, which we're concerned about. They're dependent on the seepage of the groundwater. And then the base flow is that critical amount of water that comes out late in the year in particular that we're worried about, that supplies the fish migration and minimal amounts of water for the GDEs. Okay, next slide. Okay, here's just a real simple schematic of the system. On the left side, you have San Lorenzo Valley drawing from the rain comes down in the creek, and they have surface diversions, and they get a lot from the Santa Margarita Aquifer, and then a bit from the Lompico, not so much, actually, surprisingly. And then Scotts Valley Water District, on the other hand, is drawing all from the Lompico, Butano, kind of lower ends of the aquifer there. And then over on the right-hand side, which we won't see on the other slides, is the Scotts Valley Water District is drawing off the San Lorenzo River. They put water up in the Loch Lomond Reservoir and use that. They have other sources as well. And then there's the GDEs dependent on the river and actually creeks and streams too. So go ahead, next page. So the problems that we are having is the Lompico aquifer storage levels are depleted from historic levels. And these lowered levels are causing reduced San Lorenzo River base flows, which reduces water availability downstream for GDEs and Santa Cruz Water District. During drought years, the surface waters are less available for places like San Lorenzo Valley Water District, which forces greater reliance on groundwater sources, including the Santa Margarita aquifer. So these increases in Santa Margarita pumping during droughts further diminishes the SME Santa Margarita base flow contributions, which might otherwise help GDEs in Santa Cruz. So we kind of have, in drought years, we're getting kind of a worst case scenario. So there's some alternate water sources that have been suggested, but they have some issues. Use of the non-Loch Lomond surface waters for conjunctive use project is unreliable because in many months and years, they may not be surface water, which we've heard Georgina mention today, that actually there's quite a bit of water. I was surprised from her discussion, but obviously in some months and some years, there's not. Use of Loch Lomond surface waters for a conjunctive use project requires infrastructure to treat or transfer the water. So there's not really a way to get the water from Loch Lomond currently to Scotts Valley, for example, to do in lieu. Right now, we'd have to have new plants. If San Lorenzo Valley sells its Loch Lomond water share to Scotts Valley, then Santa Cruz Water District loses an important source of their water. So they're already using that and kind of counting on that. So they would miss out. If Scotts Valley Water District uses recycled water sources, then those sources are expensive to process and have a large carbon footprint. I'm really concerned about that. Okay, so the possible solution here is the advanced in lieu that we're going to discuss here, which is in lieu what we've heard before, but some other kickers on top of it. Go ahead. So this is the two, we're going to focus on the Scotts Valley and San Lorenzo Valley water systems. You see San Lorenzo Valley on the left. It uses a combination, like I mentioned before, of surface, Santa Margarita, and Lompico, and Scotts Valley on the right is using just the Lompico. Go ahead and next. And then as proposed in the conjunctive use programs, we're just going to show the simplicity here, not all the detail, but basically when extra surface water is available, send it via the interties to the Scotts Valley and San Lorenzo Valley water district areas that normally pump Lompico water. So hopefully we'd rest not just the Scotts Valley, but also maybe the San Lorenzo Valley wells as much as possible with the surface water. Go ahead. And then an interesting thing here, the arrows, the blue lines got smaller here on the left. So basically what this is trying to show is we're still drawing some surface water, but less, and the Santa Margarita aquifer more. So there's basically times when we think that Santa Margarita can be a sponge, and in wet years, we go ahead and pull extra water out of the Santa Margarita in times when we can't really pump the surface water. There's not enough extra left over for Scotts Valley, but we think we can get away with pulling out of the Santa Margarita and not impacting the GDEs in Santa Cruz downstream in the good years. So we can actually, this is an important key point, is we think we can get a lot of extra water transferred over with the in lieu transfer this way. This is an additional resting of the Lompico wells, and it's important. Okay, next. And then here's the really interesting thing is that in drought years, we've got a lot of water in storage now because of the extra storage that we did. So now we can go ahead and reverse the intertie flows and pump water from the Lompico aquifer back to areas that otherwise use Santa Margarita or surface waters. For example, back from Scotts Valley back to San Lorenzo Valley. And this allows surface and Santa Margarita aquifer areas to rest their pumping activities during critical drought periods to assist with base flows. This would actually help the downstream users and maybe help San Lorenzo Valley avoid some issues if there are requirements in terms of the Felton diversions. Okay, so the benefits. Lompico water storage rises faster due to using both excess surface and SMA water transfers during wetter years. Both, not just one. So ready for drought sooner. Provides higher Lompico aquifer levels that support heavier San Lorenzo Valley and Scotts Valley usage of Lompico wells through longer drought periods. So we get more storage in there faster. Higher on average Lompico aquifer levels would provide greater late season base flow contributions to SLR. Just having this would benefit the GDEs in Santa Cruz Water District. So just having more water in there is going to be good overall on average. We'll see that later in a moment on a slide. With the reverse transfer scenario, we could also provide some extra San Lorenzo River base flow for Santa Cruz Water District and GDs during critical periods. So this is actually two different things. One's an average base flow and the other one's actually a reverse transfer. So there's two things on top of each other there. So then these reverse transfers can help San Lorenzo Valley Water District out because it provides extra support during serious droughts when their heavy reliance on surface and Santa Margarita may not be reliable. San Lorenzo Valley is vulnerable because they're sitting there with a lot of surface and Santa Margarita usage. And we've seen from Georgina's talks that the Santa Margarita drains out easily. So they're kind of vulnerable to a big drought. They don't get much of their water from deeper sources, and this would allow the transfer in the other direction and help support them during a big drought. Santa Cruz Water District now gets to still hold on to the Loch Lomond Reservoir supply that is due to San Lorenzo Valley instead of possibly losing some of it. So they benefit too in this scenario. Okay, go ahead. So the benefits in terms of price, much of the infrastructure for conjunctive transfers for in lieu recharge already exists. All these pipes are already there for the most part. No costly injection wells need to be constructed. A new treatment plant for San Lorenzo Valley's water share of Loch Lomond is not needed, and an expensive plant to clean recycled water to drinking water standards is not needed. So no initial capital costs. Next page. Go ahead, next page. And then the recurring costs are similar. I mean, you want to look at not just initial costs, but costs ongoing. The conjunctive use operational costs are comparable with current water production costs. The costly injection wells do not need to be maintained and powered. Injected well water does not have to be cleaned twice, both before and after injection. And recycled water does not have to be cleaned to drinking water standards. So there's a lot of cost saving there. So in this section, we're going to go do a simplistic model. It's just a first order Excel model. Kind of just give you an idea of what the results would look like. Kind of just give you an idea of how it works out. So this is a simplified model showing like an aquifer depletion. We're using the Lompico as an example. It's not exact or anything, but it's just kind of the general idea. The Lompico aquifer storage levels drop and then they stabilize, and that is because interconnected water adjacent to it starts being drawn in by the lower levels. We'll go next page. And then what we have here is the idea that we go ahead and we start supplying it water like what Georgina has shown, where we start to add in lieu or something in, we get recharge going and the water levels rise. And I picked out some certain numbers here, but the actual may vary depending on what the particular parameters are. Go ahead, next slide. And so we have two different scenarios here. One interesting thing about this is these are different recharge rates. And interestingly, the different recharge rates reach different levels because basically as you rise up higher, there's more base flow. So if you have more water going in, it can support more base flow going out. So this is kind of an interesting concept here, that you get a higher level of storage with more recharge. Go ahead, next page. This one's getting a little complicated. So what we have here is the green lines are red on the right, and the other two, the blue and the orange, are red on the left. And the red and the solid lines are from the, let's see, the dotted lines are the better scenario, and the green lines are base flow. So basically what this is showing is that if the orange line up above is more storage, and that corresponds to the green dotted line, which is you get a little bit more base flow. And then the solid blue line is a little bit less storage, and then the green line is you get a little bit less base flow out of it. And so this is just looking at the right side of that graph, where the lower of the two, the more conservative of the two models previously. We're going to look at just from recharging it and going forward. Go ahead, next page. And then what we're looking at here is a periodic drought. 3 years out of every 10, we can't do the in lieu recharge because we're in a drought situation. So Scotts Valley is pumping also, and the storage goes back down. And then maybe 7 years out of 10, the storage is going back up because we're able to do the in lieu transfers. This is assuming like maybe only, the 520 acre feet or so of transfer. So go ahead, next. Now here's the cool thing is when you start to see that we have the droughts, periodic droughts, and then we go ahead and we have this kicker where we actually take the water and we send it backwards, and we send it backwards over to the San Lorenzo Valley, and they get to rely on this water during the drought years, which helps them out. It also helps Santa Cruz out because now there's more water all in the picture coming out of the Lompico, kind of replenishing everybody and providing minimum flows for the GDEs and extra water for Santa Cruz and water security for San Lorenzo Valley in times when it might be tough. Now, this is, I could talk a lot about this particular graph. There's all kinds of things here, but depending on how fast the bathtub storage drains out, the blue line might rise quite a bit further before the green line comes up. And so it might be, you might get quite a bit more storage in here before the leakage equals the amount of water coming in. It just depends on some of the factors that you use in the model. But basically, it's all a good thing. Generally, the storage is higher than we have today. That's the blue line. Generally, we have the flows are higher than we have today. That's the green line. The flows are going up. Now, they aren't going to save Santa Cruz. We're looking here at during the drought periods, during the worst years when it gets down to 7 cubic feet per second, which could happen this summer by the way things are looking. This would only kick in maybe about 1 extra cubic foot per second, which would be helpful, but it's not going to save, everybody. Okay, next page. So what you guys need to decide is whether or not you would like to direct staff to look into this idea and have it investigated as a possible management action to be included in the project, I guess, to be included in the GSP, Groundwater Sustainability Plan. So any, I guess, questions at this point?
Yeah, so let's open the floor. Let's get in the queue for questions and see what board members have to say. And then after that, we'll go on to see if there's any feedback by staff, and we'll do the same drill we've been doing. So any members of the board wish to make any comments or ask any questions? All right. Seeing none and hearing none, I'm going to go to staff. Oh, wait. Chris, go ahead, please.
I just want to say quickly, very nicely done, good presentation. Thank you. Thanks for all that work.
All right, thank you. Any other board members wish to weigh in before I move on to staff? Okay. Gail, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I think this is interesting and imaginative. And what I just don't know is, and maybe this is what you're asking us to do, is whether there's enough water to actually do the job that we talked about. And if, that, and we already know that ASR, which is kind of what you're suggesting here, if you're taking stuff out of the Lompico, really doesn't, you just can't do it because you don't, I would think that every time you take some water out of the Lompico, it's going to make it very hard to get to a sustainable level. But maybe, I mean, this is something to ask the staff like Georgina and others, if what their reaction is to whether the numbers would add up.
Okay, thank you. Ruth, go ahead.
Yeah, similar questions about the numbers. Actually, it seems like we just were talking about trying to do some PMAs in this area to bring more water in. And I don't quite see where you're getting this much water from that area. Do you? Or is that why we would need to run it through the model?
May I answer that?
Jeff, go ahead. You got a couple people asking sort of the feasibility. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so the basic, I mean, there's 3 major concepts there. The first concept is like the current program that Georgina was mentioning, we would transfer excess surface water over. The second step is that we would actually go ahead and we would pump the Santa Margarita aquifer wells where we could, and in wet years, only in wet years when we knew that additional pumping on those wells would not create problems for the well owners are in that area, or for downstream users like you in Santa Cruz, that basically we're looking at a wet year where there's going to be plenty of base flow, and we can calculate by looking at and doing model calculations, we can figure out that we can use the Santa Margarita like a sponge. I mean, Georgina's made a very big point for several months now that the Santa Margarita is a big sponge, and it fills up really nicely, in some years greatly, and then it just drains out in a couple of years. It's really remarkable. And how do we take advantage of that? Well, the way is that we want to delay that water, and we want to keep it for the dry years. So by taking the water that in years we know it's not going to be missed, we pull extra water out of the Santa Margarita in periods where we don't have we don't have enough surface water to just do the job, but there's a transition period where we can go to even pumping the Santa Margarita, and we use that extra water to rest the Lompico pumps even further. So we get additional in-lieu recharge. We get in-lieu recharge from the surface waters, and then we get additional recharge from Santa Margarita waters that we know won't be missed. And there's ways of calculating this. I can go into detail on that part of it. But so we get extra recharge out of this whole scenario. There's extra water extra aquifer levels rise up higher, and we even have enough water that we can actually reverse the flows and send them backwards occasionally.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Any other board member questions or comments at this time before I shift over to staff? Okay,
So-
I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor for, I'm sorry?
Wait, I just had one question back to Jeff. What you just said, is that the basic difference between the inlet recharge that Georgina's talking about and then what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. Just trying to figure out the difference between, the major difference between the two scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, it builds on top of the one that she was discussing and adds extra on top of it.
All right, thank you. Let's move on to staff. So I'm going to go to Brett and then to Rosemary. Brett, go ahead.
I have one comment about the amount of water that could be used in Scotts Valley area, and we're talking about combined pumping or not doing the combined pumping that the municipal agencies currently are doing. That is a cap. So it doesn't matter if there is more water available. The in lieu essentially is all we can not pump is as much or as little as our demand at that time is. So we're not able to put extra water in Lompico. We're just gonna stop our pumping. So that's another criteria that needs to be taken into consideration.
Thank you. Rosemary?
I just have one comment with respect to the wet year conversation about available flows. The strategy that Santa Cruz has pursued with respect to its fish flow agreements that, as I mentioned, have been negotiated with the state and federal agencies is a kind of share the wealth, share the pain kind of strategy. So in wet years, flow requirements for the city are substantially higher than they are in dry years. And so I just think that if we're going to look at things like this, which with respect to any kind of an in-lieu strategy or a surface water augmentation strategy, would be required, we really need to be thinking about what those flow requirements in those wet years are to make sure that we're respecting the contribution that needs to be left in the system for fish. Thank you.
Yeah, can I go ahead and make a couple comments about those?
Let me just make sure are there any other staff members that wish to weigh in at this time? Okay, seeing none, yes, Jeff, let's go to you and then
Sorry, Dave, I do. Did I say comment?
I don't remember all my.
Go ahead, Georgina.
Okay, sorry, I thought I had said comment there, but I didn't. So I have two points to make. The one is that, pulling out of the Santa Margarita when it's wet is going to have impacts on stream flows, on the groundwater contribution to stream flows. It's, you do one thing and there's another action, it has an effect somewhere else. And so I see there being, because that sponge releases over time. And if the next few years are dry, well, it's releasing slowly. Now, if you suddenly take all of that, it's not going to release anymore, and you're really going to impact that. I think it looked like your analysis was mostly related to groundwater levels, and not so much as to the other flows, the inflows and outflows that impact those groundwater levels. So that's just something to be, to look out for as well. And now the other thing is that this is similar to what we already modeled. There is a little bit of difference with the reverse part and things like that, but I'm not sure if this is maybe when I said we can't go into that much detail at this point. It's more operational what you're talking about, I think, and so I'm not sure if this is something that the directors want to get into this kind of detail, when at the beginning I was talking about, let's just talk general concepts.
All right, thank you. Jeff, go ahead now, please.
Okay, that's a lot of comments to have to try and remember how to respond to them. Okay, so first of all, going on Paret's idea about that, she's right that there is a limit to the amount that you can in lieu transfer based on, you can just shut the pumps down in Scotts Valley and that's all you can do. You can't do any more than that, and that's agreed. But the key thing here is that you get more months or years of possibly resting the pumps, because there's times when you can calculate that you can withdraw from the Santa Margarita successfully and not cause a problem for Rosemary and friends downstream. And so there you do get more transfer over this way. And then in terms of let's see, Rosemary, well, let me go straight to Georgina's about the stream flows. We're not taking all the water out of the Santa Margarita. Don't think of it as we're sucking it out. Your own charts show that there's huge volumes of water flowing in and out of the Santa Margarita every year, and that the amount that we pump and the amount that we consume is actually only a small percentage of that. And I'm modeling this based on like electronic circuits that I'm familiar with and the ways we analyze things. And basically, if you pull little bits and pieces out in the periods that we're talking about, it's not going to cause any effect that's going to be noticeable. I think if you go ahead and model this, you'll see that we'll be taking water out in these wetter periods, and it'll be unnoticeable. There's huge amounts of water in the wetter periods, and so then we won't take water out that will cause reduced base flow. We're only taking a small section out of all the Santa Margarita. There's many square miles of Santa Margarita, and we're going to put a little depletion plume in one little section of it. So it's not like we're going to take 10% of the water out or 20% of the water out, nothing like that. It'll be a small depletion plume that would hopefully only happen in the winter and get refilled by spring flows. So I think if you model this, you'll find that it's not really going to make a big impact downstream, and almost unnoticeable, surprisingly. And then going back to Rosemary with the minimum flows, that's kind of like what we're talking about there. I know that in wet years you need more water, but we would be careful. I mean, the whole idea here would be to be careful and make sure we keep all of your requirements in mind, and make sure that when we draw water out, it doesn't impact you guys downstream. In fact, we want to do the opposite and turn things around. And when you're in a severe drought scenario, we get these 2-year droughts every so often that are really horrible, like this year probably. We could actually reverse the flows and help you out even more. So that's the idea behind this.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Let's at this time go ahead, Nick, open the floor for public comment.
All right, one moment. All right, if you're a member of the public calling in via telephone and you wish to comment at this time, this is your time. Again, members of the public calling in via telephone. Hearing none, seeing none from the phones. Members of the public who are joining us via GoToMeeting. Not even actually sure if we have any.
Okay.
Yeah, hearing none, seeing none. I do have a question from Sierra Ryan.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Hi, sorry, I'm a little late to the staff question game here, but I guess I just have kind of, my first question is, if you had a place in mind where the extractions would take place. I think to your points about impacts to downstream users, impacts to groundwater dependent ecosystems, and impacts to potentially private well owners who use the Santa Margarita, if you had zoned in on areas that you thought would be better for this kind of extraction. And then I think my second question, and maybe this is one, Dave, that you were going to take, but is really what are you asking from what would you be directing staff to do with this? Are you asking for us to model it, or are you asking for us to include it in the plan as a possible project and management action, knowing that we're not going to have anything fully fleshed out by July? We're just not at that point in this basin, but we do have that list that we've been developing of potential projects and management actions, and a lot of them are pretty high level, and including this as a variation on a existing conjunctive use conjunctive use project, or concept could, that it's kind of a different level of ask between modeling this and just including it as a component of a yet to be defined project.
Yeah, I mean, I would like it to be investigated. I don't know if modeling it's the right thing to do. I mean, I guess we got one model run left. The question is, what are we going to do with that one model run left? So I think it holds merit and would give us more water than the in-lieu project that we're currently proposing, and it might give us closer to the combination of the injection and the in-lieu project in terms of the amount of water that we might get out of it. So it could be a good idea that way. But it's operational. It sounds like Georgina's feeling like it's going to be harder for her to model because it involves a lot of surface water kind of analysis. So I'm not sure that it's going to be convenient for her to do that. In terms of where we would do this at, the obvious places that we would try to make use of it, and I don't know what all the limitations are. There's a lot of caveats here. I have, there's a lot of things I don't know about the system and what the opportunities are. But the current Quail Hollow fields and the Olympia fields already are pumping Santa Margarita water, and they're pumping large volumes of it. And the question is if there are opportunities there to use some of that. Is there excess amounts of pumping capacity there that we could make use of and not necessarily have to put in additional wells? That would be great if we could just supply some of that water to Scotts Valley and help them cut back on some of their pumping. Would be the idea there. And as opposed to putting in other wells, which is another opportunity, is to put in new wells in new locations. That's at a slightly greater expense. So I don't know what the options are there. That would be a discussion that we could. I've been trying to actually have this discussion with San Lorenzo Valley and Santa Cruz, but we're all constrained by this board situation and not allowed to go and talk to them and ask them about it.
So Jeff, let me pose a question to you, and then I'm going to pose it to Georgina. It has to do with sort of the implications of, you have a question posed here. Would like to direct staff to have this proposal investigated. Georgina's already spoken a little bit. I'm going to come back to her to speak from her consultant perspective on the cost implications of what that means. But I want to know from you, when you say the word investigated, because these are your words, it's your slide, you just mentioned you recognize you don't know whether it actually means modeling or not. So what do you mean by investigated, so that the board has clarity of what they're about to weigh in on, yay or nay?
Well, if it would make the difference, if our choices are that we would use a plan like this that could save us a lot of money, and a plan like we have to go to two plans, including both in the basic in lieu and injection, I would rather have this investigated as an alternative to the injection because it's much lower capital costs and much lower ongoing costs. So I think that it would hold a lot of merit in terms of saving the whole, a lot of us a lot of money if this would work out. And so, I don't know if that means it just gets listed as one of the potential plans, or if it actually means that we end up doing a model run on it. I don't know the ins and outs of this GSP process well enough to know how to answer that.
Okay, so Georgina, I'm going to come to you next. I don't want to put you in the spot of speaking favorably per se or unfavorably of Jeff's proposal, because it's out there for everybody to consider. But from a consultant perspective of implications, when you look at this and you look at the word investigated and this whole question of model and non-model, what's your interpretation of what that means in terms of beneficially informing things, and what the implications would be cost-wise to your consultant budget? I think the board needs to hear that too before they weigh in on this.
I'm actually going to ask Cameron to answer that. Cameron, do you need a few minutes? Or I got to spread it out. It can't all be me. I got to use my resources here.
Cameron's still here? Yeah, you're still here. Okay.
Yeah, I'm still here. Georgina asked me to stay the whole time. I think just for this reason, just to answer a question like this. I think, there is additional cost, but was in our scope to do that additional run. So if the board wants to consider looking at, and I'm already jumping to the model because I'm a modeler probably, but the board wants to use the run to evaluate this. I think it could be done conceptually with the caveats that we continue to say, that this isn't a fully fleshed out project at all. It's just a concept. The board is interested in investigating this concept with the model. I actually would recommend if it's in our scope, and I think it is, if you do investigate it, to use the model, because those, the concerns that Georgina brought up are the concerns. What are the drawbacks to it with respect to undesirable results? I don't know. I think the question is, we've always said we want to model stuff that's realistic. I don't know enough about the system to say how realistic it is. But if it's possibly realistic, and we can be clear that this isn't a fleshed out project, I'm fine with modeling it, but I'm not the one to talk about how realistic it is, and whether, and it's certainly up to the board to say this is something you're interested in.
All right, so the bottom line, I want to not try to put words in your mouth here, but what I'm inferring from what you're saying is that you think that if there's going to be an assessment of merit, it really should be done in a modeled context rather than sort of an anecdotal, or what I would call kind of like a spreadsheet or bench scale type of analysis. You think that in order to get some real meaningful insights, it would need to be modeled, and that's where the level of effort should be. Otherwise, the level of effort to look at it further absent the model might be of limited merit. Am I saying that accurately?
Yeah, I think that's generally what I'm getting at. I think the one thing we all recognize is that we're limited in scope. So if there is something some people would prefer to look at other than this, that should be considered. I think the answers from earlier today didn't really lead to additional model runs necessarily. So it did seem to me that it did leave open a potential run. I guess the only one were the management accidents north of Bean Creek. But those that I think are kind of in the realm of potentially being better looked at, just talked about less rigorously with the model, that you just talk conceptually more there. That's kind of the sense I got. And so I think maybe in the board's consideration, they should think about, was something I said earlier about management actions north of Bean Creek, do I need that to be looked at more thoroughly than this idea, or there's something else that I think needs to be looked more thoroughly than this idea? So I think that's a choice to potentially make.
Okay, thank you. Eden, you've got a question? Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I guess that partially answers it. I mean, unless we have something else on deck that we think is a great use of our remaining model run, we're not going to waste a remaining model run that's prepaid, right? So unless somebody's got something better, why wouldn't we throw the dice?
I'm not sure.
I don't think it's a prepaid. I mean, you didn't enter into a fixed fee agreement with Montgomery. They're on a time and materials basis, I believe. So it's in the budget, but it's not like you already paid for it. Am I correct about that, Brett?
That's correct. Yes, it's a time and material, so every hour matters.
Well, then who came up with this concept of a remaining model run?
That's in the budget. We don't have to use everything that's in the budget. We could decide we're done now, and we can save that money.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments? All right, so the question before you is, as is stated here, would you like to direct staff to have this proposal investigated as a possible management action to be included? You've heard insights from some staff, and you've heard insights from the consultant team that they would believe that this, to give you meritorious information, it would best be the term investigated would best be supported by doing this as a modeling exercise rather than some sort of anecdotal or spreadsheet type of an approach. So with that, I'm going to go through the same process, and you can indicate that you support this as a yes, or no, you don't support it, or you could live with it. So Director Angfer?
Before we do that, can I say one thing? Can we?
Sure.
I don't think it has to be quite that binary. I think the choice could be, can we look at it as a model, or use our last model to do it, or can we just include it in our list of possible projects? I don't think it's like it's got to go away. We don't want to see it anymore. I think we could include it in the list of possible projects and flesh it out when it comes time to do projects. That's my opinion.
Okay. Is anybody opposed to approaching it in that regard? Again, I do need to kind of give some binary clarity of a question, Chris, because otherwise it creates a complex set of answers by people when they're saying yes.
It's pretty binary. It's two things. It's either it gets investigated as a project. I guess it could be triary, but I don't see anyone saying, I never want to see this again. I don't even want it to be put into our suite of possible projects. I think the binary is it needs to be further investigated before it goes into our suite of possible projects, or we put it in our suite of possible projects. We don't need to investigate it right now. That's
okay. Anybody opposed to that framing? Okay, seeing no opposition or anybody weighing in, then I'm going to restate what Chris just said. So the question before you is, you can either say I don't support it at all, or you can say I support it being a part of the project list, or you can say I support it being a project that is technically investigated at this time. So I'm basically getting three options: a no at all, a included in the list, or investigate it.
Jesus.
So, Professor, well, yeah, sure, Professor Angfer.
Finally, props, project.
Project. All right,
Project
Supervisor Cohn.
list.
I agree. Project list. I think it's an interesting proposal that has merit. I don't see it, as ultimately. I don't think it's going to be so significant that it's going to, remove the obligation to do some, recycled water and at some point in the future. It's not going to take that off the table, but I'd like to see it on the project list and not technically invested at this time.
Thank you, Supervisor McPherson.
Yeah, I'll go. This is a lot of assumptions here, and I'll go ahead and say it's okay to be part of the project list. But I just want to make sure the staff has enough time. We've got a tight time frame here, and I guess what I've heard is it's okay, we can do this. So okay, I'll go ahead with staff says we can. But I'm really hesitant.
Well, I think
I'll go ahead to be.
Putting on the project list is certainly a lower risk factor in terms of time implications and cost implications. So I'm taking you to say.
I'll go ahead with that. Yes, on that.
All right. Director Cassidy?
I would investigate it.
Okay. Director Koopman?
Yeah, obviously, I think it should be looked into. I think it could be really helpful.
All right. Director Pollack?
I think it has some really good, it's very interesting, it has some good concepts. I don't know that I'm ready to technically invest it right now. I think there's some other things we need to get fleshed out with it, so I'm willing to put it on the project list.
Thank you. Director Dills?
Yes, I'd like to see it included on the project list for consideration, and thank you, Director Koopman.
All right. Director Mahood?
Project list.
Thank you. Director Smalley?
I think it should be investigated and modeled.
Thank you. Director Stiles?
project list. And thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. And Director Perry.
I think it should be investigated.
All right. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 directors supporting it being on the project list, and 1, 2, 3, 4 directors supporting it being investigated. So at this time, it is supported across the board, but it is supported more so to be on the project list at this time. So that is the outcome. Thank you, Jeff. It was a pleasure working with you and on this. And so with that, I'm going to hand things back over to Director Perry.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Everyone, we did something. That's good. Okay, we have 2.2, I believe, is our next. Someone nod and tell me I'm not asleep yet. Yes, okay. Board vacancy, we need to appoint alternate Director Koopman to well owner representative vacancy and form an ad hoc committee and appoint the members of the committee to conduct the selection process for filling the remaining well owner representative slot. So do I just, do we have to just do a motion? Do we need discussion? Motion for the first part? I would say.
Cassidy, part 1.
I have a second.
Second.
Okay, so Eden Cassidy has made a motion. Doug Engfer has seconded. Can I get a roll call vote?
Absolutely. Again, this vote is for item 2.2, appointing Director Koopman to the primary well representative position. I roll call Director Engfer.
Aye.
Director Koenig.
Aye.
Director McPherson.
Aye.
Director Cassidy.
Aye.
Director Koopman.
Aye.
Director Pollock.
Aye.
Director Dillis.
Aye.
Director Mayhood.
Aye.
Director Smoley.
Aye.
Director Stiles.
Aye.
Director Perry.
Aye.
11 for 11, motion passes unanimously.
Okay, now we got to form an ad hoc committee to appoint a new person to fill the vacant slot. So what did we do last time? We had the 2 well owner representatives and 1 member of the board joined in for fun. Is anyone dying to join Eden and Jeff on this wonderful adventure? Throw your hat into the ring, as it were, or we're going to appoint somebody. Anybody?
You have to put out a notice. You have to put out a notice first, right?
For the position.
Yeah, I think you have to. I thought that process was that you had to put out a notice for a period of time, and then.
Yes, but we form a subcommittee.
Right.
I'm just saying, anyone from the board would like to join Jeff and Eden in that subcommittee?
Can one of the alternatives do it?
The alternates?
Terry,
Yeah.
are you still there? What?
I am opening up the bylaws right now, so bear with me, everybody.
Okay. If nobody wants to do it, I might throw my hat in the ring if they'll have me.
Oh, well, I'll nominate you.
Eden's not smiling. He's looking all dour. Maybe he doesn't want me to tag along.
As long as you bring the guitar you were playing earlier and we can hear it.
I can do that without thinking, so that's the only reason I do that.
I have the answer now. 5.1 of the bylaws says the board may establish by action item 1 or more standing or ad hoc committees and appoint committee members to assist in carrying out the purposes and objectives of the agency. No committee or participant on a committee shall have any authority to act on behalf of the agency except as duly authorized by the board. except as otherwise approved by the board, directors shall comprise a majority of each committee. Standing committees shall comply with applicable provisions of the Ralph M. Brown Act. So that's it.
So I guess we could open it up to alternates. Does anybody, just,
It says, except as otherwise approved by the board, directors shall, so you have discretion within the exact language of 5.1.
okay. Is there anybody who's, Donna, you're here. Bill, is that Bill Eckwall? Yeah, I think it is.
Hey, Bill's here.
If either of you want to do this, I'm not, Bill?
Thanks, Chris, but I'm going to pass.
Okay. All right, Donna? Okay. Well, then I will, I'll nominate myself, or somebody nominate me.
Oh, I
Yeah.
already did.
Okay, so do we have to vote on that?
I do need a motion, yes.
Okay.
I
And
move
it's for the full thing, the forming an ad hoc committee and appointing the members. It can be all part of the same motion.
Okay, in that case, I move that we appoint an ad hoc committee to find a new alternate well owner representative, and we appoint the 2 well owner representatives plus Chris Perry to that committee.
One second, this is Dillis.
Okay. Jack seconded. Okay, can I get a roll call vote?
All right, again, the roster for this committee, this is going to be an ad hoc committee to select a new well owner representative to be the new well owner alternate. The roster for this is Eden Cassidy, Jeff Koopman, and Chris Perry. Stiles Dillis for the motion, and Director Angfer. Director Angfer?
Sorry, I thought I was unmuted. Aye.
Director Koenig?
Aye.
Director McPherson?
Aye.
Director Cassidy?
Aye.
Director Koopman?
Aye.
Director Pollock?
Aye.
Director Dillis?
Yes.
Director Mayhood?
Aye.
Director Smoley?
Yes.
Director Stiles?
Aye.
Director Perry?
Why not? Okay,
Motion passes unanimously.
great. Thank you so much. No consent agenda, no administrative, staff reports presented quarterly. Do any directors have a report at this time? Oh, no, we're doing that quarterly. Oh, I like that. Director reports are presented quarterly. Future items, everyone can see that. Informational items. Everyone sure can see that too. That takes me to item number 10. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move adjournment.
Okay.
A second.
Okay. Everyone say aye.
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 A point.
Thank you, everybody. Great job. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Jeff, for your hard work, and Georgina and Cameron and everyone. Thank you all. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Good night.